go along with Lyndon Johnson's efforts to end the war in Vietnam, because Richard Nixon in '68 was running against Vice President Hubert Humphrey. And if the war was ended, Humphrey would have won. And there's no doubt about that. All the polls showed that. But with the war continuing, and by '68, it was insanely unpopular. And LBJ had actually negotiated peace. They were going to meet in Paris that fall and sign the deal. And Nixon blew it up just so that he could beat Hubert Humphrey, which he did. And he was never held to account for it. And we've got the audio tapes of Lyndon Johnson talking, President Johnson at the time, talking with Senate Majority Leader Everett Dirksen saying, or maybe Senate Minority Leader, whichever, saying this is treason. So number one, Nixon. Then after Nixon, of course, we had Jerry Ford. He was an illegitimate president because Nixon was an illegitimate president. And after Jerry Ford, you had Ronald Reagan cut a deal with the Ayatollah and to hold the hostages in Iran, and that deep-sixed or tanked Jimmy Carter's presidential aspirations. That was confirmed by the then president of Iran, Abul Hassan Bani Sadr, in the Christian Science Monitor and other venues. I recapped that. And then George Herbert Walker Bush, when the word was out, when in 1986 they got busted for the October surprise Iran-Contra, you know, for selling those weapons to Iran in exchange for holding the hostages. When they got busted for that, Lawrence Walsh, the prosecutor, the federal prosecutor, the special counsel, had subpoenaed George Herbert Walker Bush's, then President Bush's, diary of that time, which would have shown that he knew this was going on and he was part of it, and he could have gone to prison. And so his Attorney General, Bill Barr, said, oh, well, just pardon all of them, which he did on Christmas Day, or the Christmas Eve, actually, in 1992. And that was the end of that. So, you know, another, that and the Willie Horton ads, another illegitimate president. And then we get, you know, after Reagan, we get George W. Bush, who down in Florida, his brother throws 70,000, between 57,000 and 90,000. The numbers are still in dispute. At least 57,000 people off the voting rolls in Florida. And, you know, as a result of that, in theory, they were, you know, George W. Bush won the election by 537 votes, but there's a huge caveat. First off, in Bush v. Gore, the Supreme Court stepped in because there was going to be a recount of all of the ballots in Georgia, in Florida in 2000. And this was ordered by the state Supreme Court. And had they recounted all of the ballots, they would have discovered this. I am quoting now from the New York Times, quote, while 35,176 voters wrote in Bush's name after punching the hole for him, 80,775 wrote in Gore's name for him. 80,775 wrote in Gore's name while punching the hole for Gore. Florida Secretary of State Katherine Harris decided that these were spoiled ballots because they were both punched and written upon, and ordered that none of them should be counted. Many were from African-American districts where older and often broken machines were distributed, causing voters to write onto their ballots so their intent would be unambiguous. So George W. Bush lost by 45,600 votes, but those 45,599 votes were not counted by Katherine Harris, right? And then, of course, the Supreme Court stopped the counting of the actual ballots, which would have discovered those 45,000. This was, they discovered them a year later. You know, and Scalia, in his Bush v. Gore decision, said, the counting of votes does, in my view, threaten irreparable harm to petitioner George W. Bush and to the country by casting a cloud upon what Bush claims to be the legitimacy of his election. So that was another stolen election, this time with good buddies of you know, well, Clarence Thomas was put on the court by George W. Bush's daddy, George Herbert Walker Bush. Excuse me. And then on top of that, George W. Bush told Mickey Herskowitz before he was even a nominee for president in 2000, that if he became president, he was going to have a war with Iraq that would get him reelected in 2004. And sure enough, he did that, even though Iraq had absolutely nothing to do with 9/11, absolutely nothing to do with Al-Qaeda, absolutely nothing to do with, you know, any of those guys. It was just, you know, So Bush lies us into this war. And then you get Trump coming into office with the help of the Russians. You've got his campaign manager, Paul Manafort, who had worked for the Russians, had taken millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars from the Russians, shoveling inside, campaign polling data off to Russian intelligence in 2016 so that they could micro-target 26 million Americans in 6 swing states to get the Electoral College vote for Donald Trump. And that's how he became president in 2016. And now Trump knows that Russia made him president in 2016 without that help, without the millions of dollars that Putin spent, and the literally over 120 million impressions created by the posts, the social media posts from the Internet Research Bureau, the Russian intelligence arm, pretending to be Americans, mostly on Facebook, but also on Twitter. Had it not happened, Trump would never become president, and Trump knows that. And he wants Putin to do it again. And so now, to Republicans, don't you dare send any aid to Ukraine, and don't you dare do anything about the southern border crisis, because I owe Putin, and I want to hand him Ukraine so that he'll help me out in this election, and I want to run on the border crisis, and so don't fix it. Wait for me. And Mitch McConnell now, just like he did with Merrick Garland's nomination, that was over 400 days that Mitch McConnell sat on that nomination. People say, well, Ukraine, the election is 11 months away. I mean, he can't hold out that long. Well, he did. He held out that long for the Supreme Court. So now Trump is trying to exacerbate this crisis on our southern border and screw Ukraine in a way that's going to lead to mass casualties and disrupt the international order, all to give Putin what he wants, the same way Nixon used Vietnam, Reagan used Iran, and Bush used Iraq just to win a damn election. We should not allow this to happen anymore. We have been badly treated, shall we say, by 6 Republican presidents, 5 illegitimate Republican presidents now. So call your members of Congress and tell them that, it's time for Congress to pass border security, aid to Ukraine, aid to Israel, get this done. It looks like it's coming out of the Senate. You've got people like Thom Tillis, who I'm no big fan of, but, the Republican senator from South Carolina, and Mitt Romney, the Republican senator from Utah, just coming right out and saying, this idea of Donald Trump's to kill this legislation just because he thinks it'll help him politically is wrong. It's not good for the nation. It's not good for Ukraine. It's not good for world peace, frankly. In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Tyranny, From Plato to Trump, Fools, Sycophants, and Citizens by Andrew Fiala. This is from the preface. It starts out with a quote from Mary Wollstonecraft from her book, A Vindication of the Rights of Women. Quote, "Tyrants would have cause to tremble if reason were to become the rule of duty." We recently witnessed the failure of a would-be tyrant who attempted to subvert the rule of law and overturn the result of a democratic election. The American system was pushed toward a cliff, but constitutional guardrails slowed things down. Conscientious people pumped the brakes, and the system held. This was a lesson of tyranny averted. We should take stock and learn what worked and what needs improvement in our system and in our souls. And while the American crisis of 2020-2021 was frightening, a broader historical perspective helps. The threat of tyranny is common, but the cure is well known. It involves virtuous citizenship and a stable constitution. The tyrant's rise and fall is an old story. Consider, a plague descended on the nation as the tyrant ranted and raved, refusing to admit that he was the cause of the nation's ills. The tyrant lived in a fantasy world of his own creation. He refused to accept what was said by those who spoke truth to power. Instead, he listened only to those who flattered his ego and encouraged him in his delusions. The nation suffered profoundly under the tyrant and his plague. He tried to blame the plague on some other scapegoat. Members of the public were seduced by the tyrant and his sycophants to sacrifice everything on behalf of a lie. Violence erupted. When the awful truth was finally revealed, the chorus reached a tragic conclusion. Our lives were mere shadows, and then there's a block of poetry here. Our lives were mere shadows, happiness fades away to nothing. The tyrant's fall reminds us that no human creation lasts forever. Plague and trouble make victims of us all. This is from Oedipus, the Tyrant, lines 1190. This is the story of Oedipus. It is also the story of Donald Trump. The players in this tragedy are found throughout history. They are the tyrant, his sycophants, and the moronic masses. The tyrant rages, the sycophants simper, the masses cheer and howl, fight and die. As the plague spreads, good things fall apart and decency suffers. This tragedy brings with it the risk of despair. The good news is that the cure for this disease is well known. It is, as Mary Wollstonecraft suggested, reason. Life in general must be made reasonable. This means we need a reasonable constitution as well as wise and virtuous citizens. Wisdom and virtue work together to prevent tyranny. Plato and Aristotle knew this, as did John Adams. Adams wrote in his diary when he was Vice President of the United States, quote, "Tyranny can scarcely be practiced upon a virtuous and wise people." But wisdom, virtue, and reason are often lacking. Wollstonecraft, I've got my Marys wrong. This is Wollstonecraft, I'm sorry. Wollstonecraft laments the fact that, quote, "tyranny in whatever part of society it rears its brazen front will ever undermine morality." Tyranny is not only a political problem, it is also a moral and spiritual one. It afflicts our souls as well as churches, businesses, and family life. Wollstonecraft's important contribution was to argue that for the liberation of women in an era when women were oppressed by the tyranny of patriarchal families. Wollstonecraft was a contemporary of Thomas Jefferson and other thinkers of the 18th century Enlightenment. Despite their claims to enlightenment, the heroes of this tradition suffered from moral blindness, as we all do. Jefferson's words inspired a revolution against the tyrant King George III. The words inscribed in the Jefferson Memorial state, "I have sworn upon the altar of God eternal hostility against every form of tyranny over the mind of man." But Jefferson owned slaves, one of the more obvious forms of tyranny in the world. We must all be careful of our blind spots. Reason aims to shed light by holding up a mirror. The remedy for tyranny is philosophical self-examination. This is an ongoing process, not a panacea. Each generation must seek to make progress and virtue can cure tyranny. predates the Enlightenment by over 2,000 years. It was the solution proposed by the ancient Greeks, who gave us the very language we will employ here. Words such as tyranny, sycophancy, democracy, and political philosophy. The Greeks emphasized the need for virtue among the players in the political drama. Modern thinkers built upon this and emphasized the need for a rational system of government that prevents tyranny. Tragedy is avoided when leaders and citizens are virtuous and when a stable constitutional system guarantees individual rights, divides power, and creates checks and balances. We have known the cure for thousands of years, but the disease is genetic. Every generation or so, the conditions conspire to bring together an ugly cast of characters that includes the tyrant, his sycophants, and the moronic fools who cheer him on. The book, Tyranny from Plato to Trump, by Andrew Thom.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hey, happy President's Day. It has me thinking of Jimmy Carter, actually. You know, he was a good man, a decent president, and he's been in hospice for almost exactly a year now. In fact, I think a little bit over, a couple of days over. But anyway, it's President's Day, and but we're here and we're doing a live show. Why the corporate tax bracket should go back to 52%. I'll share that with you in a few minutes. Also, Sinclair's recipe for TV news and MAGA, crime, homelessness, illegal drugs. Is that news or is that propaganda? And was Navalny's death planned minute by minute? Some startling new evidence. In the second hour of our program, Biden is calling out Trump's NATO treason. We'll get to that. Also, meanwhile, the Kremlin threatens to fire nuclear weapons at London, Washington, Berlin, and Kyiv if they lose in Ukraine. Right, we're all terrified. And a crazy alert, Trump somehow ties Navalny's murder to his own legal woes. Yes, Donald Trump can't talk about anything except himself, right? In the third hour of our program, are New York lobbyists aiding and abetting the climate crisis? This is a fascinating story about the whole lobbying industry. And a pesticide linked to reproductive issues has been found in Cheerios, Quaker Oats, and other oat-based foods, particularly those imported from overseas, apparently. I'll fill you in on that when we get to the third hour of the program. Also, just a couple of quick points. On HBO last week tonight, I'm not sure when that plays. I think it was yesterday. But in any case, John Oliver, who's making some pretty good money hosting this show on HBO. John Oliver offered to pay Clarence Thomas $1 million a year for the rest of his life and throw in a brand new $2.4 million motor coach upgrade if Thomas simply agrees to resign from the Supreme Court within 30 days. He's like, your move, Clarence, your effing move. Well, I don't know. Harlan Crow can outbid John Oliver, I'm sure. John Oliver might be a multimillionaire. Harlan Crow is a billionaire. So I suspect that Clarence Thomas is going to continue with the bribes that he's been getting for the last 20 years rather than jump ship and go with the new guy. But, we'll see, right? Also, a bizarre story. This Christian family moved to Russia to escape the gay, right? They were Canadian. They're a right-wing Canadian family of 8. And they did this on the internet. They said there's too much left-wing ideology, LGBTQ, trans, things that we don't agree with that they teach here now. We wanted to get away from that for our children. So they moved to Russia. And immediately when they landed, and the Russian officials had said, oh, yeah, we'll help you find a farm. We'll help you get a job, blah-de-blah-de-blah. So they moved to Russia. They sold everything they owned. They took the money. They put it in a Russian bank. And the Russian bank immediately seized all their assets because Canada is seizing Russian assets, right? And the Russian officials have vanished who were offering to help them, and now they're quite upset. Mom just did a YouTube where she said, I'm very disappointed in this country at this point. I'm ready to jump on a plane and get out of here. We hit the first snag when you have to engage logic in this country. It's very frustrating. And then her husband, apparently noticing that Alexei Navalny just got murdered for criticizing the Russian government, immediately posted a YouTube video saying, oh, she didn't mean it. Everything's fine. We're happy here. Yeah. All right, my op-ed today over at HartmannReport.com is titled "Why the Corporate Tax Bracket Should Go Back to 52%," and it's pretty straightforward. You've got all these giant corporations that are paying basically nothing in corporate income tax. And the reason why is not because they're doing what the corporate income tax is intended to do. I mean, we have income taxes for two reasons. One, the reason that everybody understands is you got to raise money to pay for, government to provide the services that keep businesses going and keep us all alive. But the second reason, and the one that most people don't even understand, but is really important, is you have corporate taxes, corporate income taxes, and you have specific loopholes that let you get out of paying corporate income taxes because you want people to use those loopholes. You want them to do those things. And what are those things? If you pay your employees better, that's tax deductible. That's a loophole. If you develop new products, then the research and development associated with new product development or bringing new products to the marketplace, advertising, marketing, hiring, sales, it's all tax deductible. It all reduces your profits. It reduces your taxes. These are things, if you invest in your local community, if you build a new factory, if you develop a new product line, these are all things that we want companies to do. So we give them incentives in the tax code to do these things. They can get a tax deduction. The problem is that since the Reagan tax cut, but really the big drilling of holes into the tax code happened in 2001 and 2003 during the George W. Bush administration, his two big tax cut bills, and then in 2017 with the Donald Trump tax cut. And when you look at corporate profits, you see this just lurch to the top, this massive explosion in corporate profits immediately after the George W. Bush and the Donald Trump tax cuts for billionaires and big corporations. And what this means is that these corporations no longer, because they've got all these ways to get out of paying taxes that are not doing things that we want them to do. They're doing things we don't want them to do. They're engaging in stock buybacks. For example, the tech industry bought back almost $1 trillion worth of its own stock in 2020 and over $1 trillion in 2021. Buying back stock, I mean, $1 trillion, investing $1 trillion in buying your own stock, all that does is manipulate the price of the stock. It doesn't develop new products. It doesn't build new factories. It doesn't pay employees better. It doesn't offer better benefits because they don't have to do those things anymore because Trump and Bush gave them, and Reagan gave them these massive corporate tax cuts. And so we're no longer seeing companies engaging in the kind of behavior that they used to engage in, which was, developing new products because it's tax deductible, bringing new products to the marketplace because it's tax deductible, developing, building new factories and expanding product production because it's tax deductible. Trump dropped the top tax rate all the way down to a flat rate of 21%, or not a flat rate, but down to a maximum rate of 21%, which is just crazy. I mean, it used to be 52% when Eisenhower was president, and 52% did it. I mean, that caused corporations to invest in their people. Back then, the income and wealth of the bottom half of America was growing faster than the income and wealth of the top half of America. That was a good thing, right? The middle class was growing and expanding, and prosperity was spreading across the country. In large part because corporations, in order to avoid paying taxes, were doing the things that we want them to do, and which is why we wrote in those particular tax loopholes. It's the same thing with individual taxes. We want people to buy houses, so we give them a tax break on buying a house. The house, the 100% of the interest that you pay on that house is deductible from your taxes. Unless Reagan changed that. I don't think he has. So, I mean, you get this. It's because we want, you have children and you get, a new tax deduction every year. Because, these are behaviors that we want to incentivize. But you can't incentivize behavior with taxes when the tax code is so full of holes that nobody's paying attention to it. So anyhow, it's just, my article today was just a pretty straightforward pitch to say we need to raise the corporate tax rate in order to incentivize corporations to once again do the things that help build America, that make this a better country, a stronger country, that build and strengthen the middle class, rather than just running share buyback scams, which used to be a crime. You know, Reagan legalized this in '83. But starting in 1935, this was a crime, share buybacks. It was called stock price manipulation. Time to change the tax code.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's talk media for the sane among us. I'll be right back with more of the news of the day and your calls. And welcome back, Alfredo in Mountain View, California. Hey, Alfredo, what's on your mind today?
Hey, good morning, Tom. I wanted to cordially invite all the Trumpists that if you don't like our country, move to Russia, move to Iran, move to Saudi Arabia and see how you like living there, these totalitarian governments.
Yes.
And, yeah, but that was my comment. And I had a quick comment about Fannie Willis. You know, what they're doing to her is just shameful. It's embarrassing.
It is.
She has done nothing wrong. This is a public lynching, what they're trying to do to her.
Yep.
But I think they're going to fail miserably because they have absolutely no proof of anything.
Yep.
And she will not be disqualified.
I have a feeling that she came out of this or is going to come out of this stronger than she went into it. I mean, you know, we'll see.
Yeah.
And there might be another card that they've got up their sleeve and that we don't know about. But, you know, their whole argument was that she hired Nathan Wade so that he could kick back some of those big government bucks to her. But he's only being paid $250 an hour, which is squat. I mean, she had three different law firms turn it down because it paid so little. And you know, and they didn't want to worry about, you know, MAGA heads coming and burning their houses down.
She's getting threats against her life, but also the attorneys representing Trump on this trial, they should have their licenses revoked. You know, you're going to go to court without evidence and try to convict or try to convict someone for a crime that doesn't exist. I think this is uncalled for, and
yeah. Although I would say the responsibility for that lies with the judge, Scott McAfee. He should have said before he allowed this to happen in open court. He should have said to the defense lawyers who are bringing these charges against Fannie Willis, the Trump defense lawyers, he should have said in chambers, just the two of us or just the three of us, show me the evidence. Give me something to prove that there is actually a crime going on here or a violation of the ethics laws, and then I'll decide whether we'll have a public hearing, rather than just letting the whole thing be this very sloppy public hearing that was purely intended to basically deliver the message to any prosecutor in the country, particularly if they're female and black,
I agree.
that you better not take on white billionaires. They will eat you alive.
Yeah, he shouldn't throw this case out. I agree. Thank you, Tom. Thank you.
Thank you, Alfredo. Good talking to you. I've only got about 40 seconds here, so I'll just add, by the way, it is coming up on 2 years since Russia began throwing literally on a daily basis, throwing bombs and missiles into Ukraine, murdering families, murdering children, intentionally, sending their troops in to rape women with specific instructions on how to do it and who to rape. They have stolen over 100,000 children from Ukraine, and Putin has trafficked them into Russia. We have no idea how many of them ended up being sold essentially into slavery, how many are being used for labor or for sex. But 100,000 children have been kidnapped from Ukraine and sent deep into Russia. And the Republicans in the House of Representatives are continuing to refuse to send any aid to Ukraine. This is morally criminal. This is so wrong. And if you have a Republican member of the House of Representatives, you need to be calling them now at 202-224-3121 and just say, get that aid to Ukraine. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So back in 1933, when Franklin Roosevelt became president, we were in the depths of the Great Depression. He raised the top income tax rate on billionaires from 25% to 90%. The ultra-rich were screaming, and here's what he had to say.
A number of my friends who belong in the very high upper bracket have suggested to me on several occasions of late that if I am re-elected president, they will have to move to some other nation because of high taxes here. Now, I will miss them very much.
He just took it right to them, right? Now, what came out of that was the world's largest and fastest growing and first major middle class. We can do this again. We just have to raise taxes on rich people. It's pretty straightforward. There's a whole article about it over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. Welcome back. So Sinclair Broadcasting has hundreds of television stations all over the country. And fascinating piece in the Washington Post by Sarah Ellison about how every year the stations that Sinclair owns conduct a short survey among their viewers to figure out what people are afraid of, get that, afraid of, so they can deliver more of that to them. A key question, this is from the article in the Washington Post. A key question in each poll, according to David Smith, the company's executive chairman, what are you most afraid of? The answers are evident, writes Sarah Ellison, in Sinclair's programming. Crime, homelessness, illegal drug use, failing schools, and other societal ills have long been core elements of local TV news coverage. But, you know, this is an article about how he has turned his television stations into a propaganda arm. For example, in Baltimore, they're running this program called Baltimore is Dying, a so-called documentary. They did the same thing in Seattle. This is from the Washington Post again. The station's focus on urban problems in Seattle gained national attention when the Sinclair station produced an hour-long documentary in 2019 titled Seattle is Dying, which described how, quote, the appeal of the city is giving way to rampant crime, homelessness, and disgrace, end quote. But fortunately, in Seattle, there's still a locally owned newspaper. Now, in Baltimore, the guy who owns the Sinclair stations just bought the Baltimore newspaper. But in Seattle, they've got an independent paper. It's called the Seattle Times, and they published a rebuttal to the documentary, pointing out that Seattle's crime rates have actually declined significantly since the 80s and 90s. But, you know, that's not stopping Sinclair from doing everything they can to basically terrify Americans. Well, you know, if it makes you money, right? I mean, this is the formula that Fox News came up with, that Sir Keith Murdoch perfected in Australia back 50 years ago. You know, deliver fear and loathing to people, you know, hate for politicians and fear of minorities in particular, particularly racial minorities and religious minorities, and you'll make a lot of money. And sure enough, you know, the Murdoch family's worth billions now. Meanwhile, we're learning that Alexei Navalny's body shows signs of bruising, and it looks like this was a coordinated hit. According to witnesses, Vladimir Putin sent spies from the FSB, Russia's intelligence service, into the Polar Wolf prison camp earlier this week. They went around and disabled all the cameras so that when Navalny was murdered, none of that would be recorded. They then issued a well-prepared statement 2 minutes after his death was supposed to have taken place. Now, that would suggest that they knew he was going to die, which would suggest that they killed him. 7 minutes later, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov was addressing the country's press. Representatives of Gulagu.net, Gulagu.net, said, quote, this rapid timing can mean only one thing. Everything was pre-planned and coordinated right down to the press release, minute by minute, second by second. And now Putin has arrested over 300 people in Moscow for laying flowers at Navalny's, at this little shrine to Alexei Navalny that has been, this popped up in Moscow. And his body is missing from the morgue. And it looks like they're not going to turn it over like they did, like they let him go to Germany. Remember the last time he was poisoned with Novichok? They kept him for 2 days thinking that would be long enough for his body to metabolize all the poison and get it out. And then they let him go to Germany where they saved his life. Well, it looks like they poisoned him again, unless they beat him to death. And if they poisoned him again, they say they're going to hang on to his body for 2 weeks, which is presumably enough time, better than 2 days, to let the poison break down in what's left of his bloodstream. Navalny's spokeswoman, Kira Yarmash, said, quote, Alexei Navalny was murdered. The whole world knows that the president of Russia personally gave this order, just as it knows that Alexei was never afraid of him, never stayed silent, and that he never stopped acting. There you go. This is an extraordinary moment, a truly extraordinary moment in our history and the history of the world. And one of the things that I want to get into about this is how Putin is playing this. I'll get into this at the top of the next hour with his new threats to use nuclear weapons and things like that. It's like these are, in my mind, these are signs of desperation. Putin's got an election coming up. And, of course, he's got it rigged. Now the country, for the very first time, everybody's going to vote electronically. So Putin can simply say, oh, well, here's how the vote came out. There will be no paper records. There will be no audit trail of this election. So, I think it's a foregone conclusion that Putin's going to get himself reelected. But his rule, I think, is increasingly being seen as illegitimate by the people of his own country. And, arresting people for putting flowers in Navalny's grave is certainly not helping his image any. So what say you? I'll pick up your calls on the other side of this break. It's 27 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Talk media for the sane among us. Stay with us.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Taking back the mainstream media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, right here. I'll be right back with your calls. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Crusaders, The Epic History of the Wars for the Holy Lands by New York Times bestselling author Dan Jones. This is from Chapter 1. It begins the book, The Count and the Imam. Count Roger of Sicily lifted his leg and farted. By the truth of my religion, he exclaimed, there is more use in that than in what you are here to say. His advisors stood chastened and a little perplexed. The Count before them was in his late 40s and salted to his bones with the experience of military campaigning in southern Italy and the islands of the central Mediterranean. As a young warrior, he had been described by one flatterer as tall and well-made, a most fluent speaker, shrewd in counsel, far-sighted in the planning of things to be done, cheerful and pleasant to everyone. In middle age, he had hardened somewhat and was not one to waste his words on fools. The plan the advisors had recommended had seemed like a good one, as courtiers' plans very often do, before they are shredded by the critiques of short-tempered potentates. Not far across the sea from Sicily, roughly 75 miles at the closest point, lay the remains of what had in ancient times been called Carthage, afterward the Roman province of Africa, and now in the 11th century, Ifriqiya. Its cities, including the capital Mahdia and on the coast, and Kairoun Island, where a vast mosque and school had for many generations been frequented by the greatest philosophers and natural scientists in North Africa, were under the shaky command of a crumbling dynasty of Berber Muslims known as the Zirids. The countryside was controlled by various Arab Bedouin tribes sent from Egypt to drive the Zirids out. Political stability was collapsing. Here lay warm and fertile farmlands.
there sat prosperous port towns, all ripe for the taking? Roger's counselors thought so, and they had therefore recommended to their testy overlord the proposal of a cousin whom one source names only as Baldwin. This Baldwin had come into possession of a great army of Christian soldiers and was casting around for somewhere godless to conquer. He had asked Roger's blessing to come to Sicily and use it as a launch pad for an invasion of Irafiqua. I shall be a neighbor of yours, he had explained, as though this were good news. But Roger of Sicily was not feeling neighborly. Irafiqua was undoubtedly ruled by various followers of Islam, he said, but those infidels happened to be sworn partners of the Sicilians in agreements that kept the peace and allowed for a rich exchange of goods in the island's markets and ports. The last thing he wanted, he ranted to his gathered minions, was a cousin imposing on his hospitality, waging a reckless war that would disrupt Sicilian trade if it was successful, and cost him a lot of money in military support if it failed. Irafiqua may indeed have been vulnerable, but if anyone was going to exploit that, it was going to be Roger himself. He had spent the last 2.5 decades, almost his entire adult life, carving out his rule in the region, and it would have been a limp end indeed if he were now to put it at risk, that pursuit of to put it at risk in pursuit of some harebrained scheme cooked up by a kinsman who had never troubled the soil of the island with his sweat. If this Baldwin wanted to fight Muslims, said Roger, he would have to find a different part of the Mediterranean in which to go about his business. There were plenty of places he could name that would be preferable to Sicily's backyard. He summoned Baldwin's personal envoy to his presence and informed him of his decisions. If his master was really serious, he said, then the best way to proceed is to conquer Jerusalem. That is how it all began. Roger, Count of Sicily, was 11th century Europe's ultimate self-made man. He was born around the year 1040 as the youngest of 12 sons sired by a minor nobleman from Normandy called Tancred of Hauteville. Given the protocols of inheritance, being born even as a second son implied a lifelong burden of fortune hunting rather than easy inheritance. To have 11 brothers ahead of you was a disaster. But by the end of the century, the Normans had begun to conquer their way around Western Europe. They took command of Saxon England in 1066. At the same time, southern Italy fell under their gaze, and opportunities that may have seemed limited for younger sons within Normandy itself, but for anyone prepared to travel, opportunity abounded. As a young man, therefore, Roger had left his homeland in what is now northwest France and set out for territory that already called many of his kinsmen and countrymen, the rich but unstable southern Italian regions of Calabria and Apulia. Toe and heel of the Italian boot, Calabria and Apulia were lands where resources were plentiful, authority was contested, and an ambitious young man with a yen for politics and warfare might make his name. Other Normans of the Hauteville clan had already found success here, fighting against the rival superpowers in the region, principally the Byzantine Greeks and Roman popes, both of whom regarded the Normans with suspicion bordering on alarm. The book Crusaders, The Epic History of the Wars for the Holy Lands by Dan Jones.
The 56-year-long crisis of treasonous and illegitimate GOP presidents is happening again. And it is. Those of you who are longtime listeners to this program know this song. I will summarize it very briefly. Richard Nixon in 1968 committed treason by reaching out to South Vietnam and bribing, essentially, the president of South Vietnam, saying, I will make you rich if you refuse to go along with Lyndon Johnson. Did you know that every weekday we send out an email before the show giving you all the topics coming up so you can be fully informed and ready to interact with our program? Or that after the show we send out Sue's Stack, a list of every topic I've discussed along with clickable hot links to every source of information I've shared with you on the air? It's all completely free and available over at thom.tv, THOM.tv. Check it out. Welcome back. Let's pick up your calls and see what's on your mind today. Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Hey, not too much, Tom. Look, you were right about, Putin, and basically he's showing weakness. But I just want to say something you already know, probably. Dictators one problem between, like, if you compare a dictatorship to like the old Soviet Politburo, they're more deliberative and they act, more cautiously than a dictator. They're more like cornered animals, and that's kind of what I'm worried about with Vladimir Putin. And I'll tell you why. All right, Michael Cohen said something that was brilliant. He said to Vladimir Putin, Donald Trump is the poor man's version of a rich man, a weak man's version of a strong man, a scared man's version of a brave man, right? That sort of thing.
Yep.
But he's right, but he needs to carry out just one step further, I think, would be informative. All right, even Tucker Carlson's interview, rambling as it was, like Rachel Maddow said, most Americans tuned out after the first 5 minutes, right, of the history lesson. Here's the thing, though. In Vladimir Putin's mind, in a dictator's mind, Donald Trump, he's helping Donald Trump, and Donald Trump will owe him. All right, there's all kinds of things that Vladimir Putin's going to do to manipulate Donald Trump that's going on the ledger. It's going on the ledger, Tom.
I think he already owns Trump. I don't think he has to do anything more to get Trump. I think he's owned Trump. I think Russia's owned Trump since the 80s.
Well, yeah. Let me say
particularly
why
since
this
his
is dangerous.
bankruptcies in the 90s, when Russian oligarchs bailed him out of his bankruptcies.
When Donald Trump has said numerous times that the presidency is the best gig in town, once Donald Trump becomes president of the United States, he's not going to consider any of that a debt. And Vladimir Putin is going to say, look, Donald, you owe me. Donald Trump might say no, and then that's when the proverbial stuff's going to hit the shan, okay?
Yeah, I doubt it.
I mean,
I really doubt it. I think Trump will try to join the axis of, Iran, China, and Russia if he was president.
Well, yeah.
He's essentially said that.
Well, let me just clarify. Well, let me just clarify. There's a lot of hand-wringing over this nuclear device put in space, right?
Yeah.
That Mike Turner dropped into public.
Right.
Look, man, this thing is, we can sit here and speculate on what it is till the cows come home. But the bottom line is, more than likely, like all dictators, look at the pattern. He will not strike out. If he's cornered, he will not strike out at America. He will strike out at someone he considers weak and vulnerable, probably the Ukraine. I hate to say it, but, I am an analyst, so. But the thing is, where will it go from there? I mean, with escalation of force, it's going to – I'm still very worried, Tom. That's all I'll say.
I am too. I think it's entirely possible that Putin will try to start and will succeed at starting World War III. And the world is certainly on the verge of this. And then China would then use that as an opportunity to try to seize Taiwan. And pretty soon all hell is breaking loose. How bad that gets and whether or not that goes nuclear is a whole nother topic of discussion. But, I share your concerns, Dave. On the other hand, I think that, we're confronted with two really bad outcomes. One is you've got Putin saying, or at least Dmitry, not Peskov, Medvedev, saying that if they lose Crimea, if they lose the territory that they've already seized, they are going to drop nukes on the United States and London. On the other hand, you've got widespread speculation. Well, you've also got Medvedev himself, last year saying that if they seize Ukraine, if they succeed in Ukraine, up next is Poland and the Baltic states. And so, either way, you've got World War III. I mean, the only thing that's going to, it appears, the only thing that's going to stop World War III is either Putin backing down, either Putin bluffing right now, or Putin being defeated. And being defeated domestically, and he's done a very, very good job of insulating himself from any sort of internal dissent. So we'll see where it goes. Dave, thanks for the call. David in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Hey, David, what's on your mind today?
Good morning. Well, pertinent to your discussion, taxes. I want to start off mentioning about local situation and then go to the federal. Mm-hmm. We have a situation right now that Stitt, our beloved right-wing Republican governor that was installed by the Kochs.
Oh, Kevin Stitt, the Oklahoma governor.
He wants to have another tax cut because we got over $1 billion. Except he's, first of all, none of the media is telling anybody. What he's done is all the people that were forced to go home because of COVID, he didn't hire back. And remember, Oklahoma is an at-will state, so you can get rid of and the union, the Oklahoma State Employee Union, has been long since neutered and neutralized. They're so against the progressive tax that I went with my sister, who's a school teacher, to protest the tax giveaways and stuff that they were doing a couple of years ago. They came out and directly told us that anybody that mentioned progressive tax, wherever they were, that segment would not be aired. So they self-censored. Nobody could say anything about taxes. It's some unknown official never could figure out whether, and I was there, never could figure out whether this was a state official or this was somebody from the news stations or what. But they essentially, I think it was from the news station, that was just saying, look, anybody that mentions the word progressive tax, we're not going to air the subject. We're not going to air the segment.
Right.
So, that was how they buried it. Now, I love to say it, your tax cuts work, because when you drive down and see these roads in such hapless condition, fortunately, thanks to the federal government, the federal highway system is doing quite well, except the whole corridor that was supposed to be going from Texas, from Mexico through Texas, through Oklahoma, and on into Kansas, where we've got Port of Catoosa, the inland seaway here in Tulsa. That's all, Abbott threw that all to the winds quite a while back.
Right. Yeah, that was years ago.
Yeah, but the fact, it's a time delay of effect where the causality is not readily apparent because it happens kind of like what's going on with our environment.
Yeah. No, I get it. So they've done these tax cuts, and it's deliberately to try to get rid of the safety net. And mind you, all this is regarding back to Social Security and what happened when, as you were talking about, Roosevelt came in and put the 90%. Well, that was when the lost cause people got along together with the people that were against Teddy's square deal, and then they all coalesced with the fascist portion and all the what's his name, the libertarian, and that whole thing, and came into this anti-New Deal, anti-safety net that Lyndon Johnson ran into when he tried to do the Great Society and to do the whole Medicare, all that backlash from the right wing. And both of you and I, we're similar ages. When we were in grade schools, our grade school was a nuclear fallout shelter. Right.
It was,
So what's the point you're making here, David? You've been going on for 3.5 minutes. I'm not sure I understand the point.
Okay, sorry. Tax cuts, the whole thing, taxes are necessary evil. We have people that are demanding to cut taxes to the wealthy, whereas in the case of the Trump tax cuts, now everybody that's poor has to pay into under the auspices, you don't have skin in the game.
Right.
And that's one of the things that people are hitting right now as we try to do taxes. Surprise, surprise. They raised it.
I get it. David, thank you very much. Kurt in Akron, Ohio. Hey, Kurt, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Thank you for taking my call, and happy President's Day.
Thank you. Back at you.
Real quickly, I don't know if you mentioned because I was on with your screener when you were doing your rant, but do you remember Sherrod Brown on your show saying that Trump 21% tax cut, that tax rate, if they, meaning the business people, were to take their factories and their jobs overseas or to Mexico, they get a 50% off coupon on that 21%. So they're only paying 10.5.
That's right. That was Trump's replacement for NAFTA. Gave American employers a huge tax cut if they moved their factories to Mexico. I don't know how that,
Mr. Buy America First, right?
Right. I don't know how it happened that, nobody in America seems to know about this. I mean, it was in the paper, it was mentioned, but it was a one-day story. And frankly, the Democrats should have been all over that.
You better believe it. But this is why I called. The new poll for the presidents in ranking, did you notice the top 10, every president from 1933, meaning Franklin Roosevelt, to 1969, meaning Lyndon Johnson, were all in the top 10? also that was your age of bargaining when things got done in this country. And then Biden was number 14, followed by Woodrow Wilson at 15. And brace yourself, number 16 was the former Republican Jesus, Ronald Reagan.
Wow.
And the current orange Jesus, Donald Trump, was the very last at 45.
Right. Yep.
So I bet Trump's probably going to say, oh, it's a rigged fake poll.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, in fact, I tweeted something about that this morning. It's at least historians are exhibiting some common sense here. I think that's a good sign. Kurt, thank you for the call. Nice to hear from you, and thanks for watching us there on Free Speech TV in Akron. It's 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. Stay with us.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archive.
Defending America from the weapons of mass deception. I'll be right back with your calls. And welcome back, Paul in Ventura, California. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind today?
Well, we have a term called greedflation, which is given by corporations that have excess market power due to their concentration over the last years. And because of that, they're able to raise their prices, above and beyond what the cost of inputs would be. So what happens now is we've had so many more monopolies, as you well pointed out, given the lax corporations oversight by the Federal Trade Commission and the Justice Department. So my question is, do we have a different landscape that we had back in the Eisenhower administration? So my concern is that because we have fewer choices, then if we increase the corporate tax rate, how do we know that they're not going to pass on those costs to us? Wouldn't we have to put in some kind of safeguards to prevent the corporations from raising the prices? For instance, I have a, internet service here. If we have one company, that's it.
Yep.
And if they
70% of America only has access to one internet provider. The answer to that is competition, Paul. And the way you get to competition in the telco space is by separating the pipe that brings the internet into your house from the data that flows over it, like they do in Europe. Like we used to do in the United States up until the early 2000s. And I don't know when this changed, but I know it changed. But it used to be that we had hundreds of companies offering internet services. It used to be just CompuServe and AOL, and they did it over common carriers, over the phone lines. Now the cable company that brings the cable into your house claims that they can be the only one who brings internet into your house, which is BS. So that's number one. And the other way you bring in competition is you break up the big monopolies. So I totally get it, and it's they're victimizing Americans. Paul, thank you. Excellent point. Well made. Thank you. Andrea in Portland. Hey, Andrea, what's on your mind today?
Hey, hi, Tom. I wanted to remember that February 19th is the 82nd anniversary for the internment of Japanese Americans.
That's right. Today was the day that FDR signed the executive order that led to the arrest of Japanese Americans. You're right.
Right. Yeah, 9066. And my family, my grandparents and parents wound up in Heart Mountain, Wyoming for several years.
Wow.
I wanted to tell you a story I recently found out, which I hadn't known. There was one fellow named Ralph Lazo in Los Angeles. He was a high school kid. And in 1942, he got on the train to go to Manzanar with his friends. He in high school were Japanese Americans. And he spent 2 years in Manzanar. His father finally found out where he was and said, okay, you can be there. He said, I wanted to be there. There's a high school here. I'm going to graduate high school, which he did. And then he got drafted and fought in the Philippines and got a Bronze Star.
Wow.
And I think he's the only person of non-Japanese heritage that wound up in the camp. That didn't have to go there.
Huh. Interesting. Interesting.
And I guess that's my story.
Okay. Well, that was a good one, Andrea. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thanks for the call. It's 10 minutes before the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. Stay with us. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. You know, one of the grand questions that political scientists have been scratching their heads over for years in America is, why do right-wing billionaires fund anti-black history movements? Why are they pouring money into these people? Why are they funding anti-trans movements? I mean, what does this have to do with being a billionaire? Well, it turns out it has a lot to do with it, and here's why. Almost 30 million Americans lack health insurance. 37 million of us live in dire poverty. 1 in 5 of us are illiterate. A quarter of Americans suffer from a diagnosable mental illness and can't get treatment. 316 people are shot every day in America. 44% of us carry student debt. And the billionaires don't want to pay income taxes to deal with any of these problems of society. That's the real issue. If they can get us fighting with each other over black history or over trans people or kids, they win. Then we're not talking about taxing them, raising their taxes to where they should be. There's a whole rant about this over at HartmannReport.com that you can read and see all the stats and all the hot links. Check it out. Welcome back. Picking up your calls here. Hills in Ventura, California. Hey, Hills, what's on your mind today?
Hey, good morning. In our election to install a new senator for Dianne Feinstein's seat, we have 2 really excellent candidates in Adam Schiff and Katie Porter. And it's confusing to me because considering what happened with Ralph Nader and then with Jill Stein, if it splits the vote, who's running against him is Steve Garvey, who's a former Dodger. You know, like, I don't think he's qualified.
We've also got Barbara Lee in that race.
And she's excellent too. So what? Yeah. There's all these great people, and I think isn't it going to split the vote? What's going to happen?
I don't know. I mean, in California, you've got this top 2 jungle primary thing, where the top 2 vote getters are the people who are on the ballot running against each other, and there's a very good chance it's going to be if you look at the polls, Adam Schiff and Katie Porter, but. I don't, if they split the vote, they might end up with numbers 1 and 2. On the other hand, yeah, it's possible that some right-winger could get in there too. We'll just have to wait and see, Hills. I don't have a crystal ball here, but I do suspect that, California's going to do just fine. Thanks a lot for the call. Ann in Van Nuys, California. Hey, Ann, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Tom. The reason I'm calling, this morning I was reading the piece in the Times about how Democrats should not be frightened that Joe Biden is our candidate and appears feeble while Trump appears to be crazy exciting. So, I was talking to my brother Lee in Detroit, who we've been listening to you for years, and he mentioned that Jimmy Carter had attributed his success to the Allman Brothers coming to his rallies, and we know the American people like celebrity better than anything else. Yep. So I'm concerned that Joe Biden is, a gooder president he's been, with that we need somebody with tremendous charisma to be standing by, and we don't. And the Democrats don't seem to be.
I can guarantee you, Ann, the Democrats are on bended knee begging Taylor Swift to get into this thing.
Well, that's why I'm calling you.
But it won't happen until after the summer.
But we've got to get some rallies going where people come, get to know the local candidates, and celebrities come out. Yeah. Do you think that, and would somebody like you be interested? Because you explain stuff to people in a way that doesn't insult them, that makes them understand what's really going on.
Yeah, but I'm not a celebrity. I might be well known in some circles, but you
are much beloved, Tom.
Thank you, Ann. But what they really need is that A-list star power. The Leo DiCaprio, exactly. Taylor Swift, level of star power. And I'm confident it's coming. You'll recall in 2016 or 2020 rather, Taylor Swift tweeted at Donald Trump specifically saying, we're going to kick your ass. We're going to beat you. And I suspect that you're going to have plenty of celebrities around this time. So
it's going to take celebrity. It's going to take celebrity, and just this confidence of who's going to be in the seat for the next 4 years.
I agree.
Let's see some of the options and make them celebrities.
Yep, and I suspect my old friend and colleague Richard Green will be all over this. Ann, thanks for the call. Steve in Simi Valley. Hey, Steve, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. I was thinking about the border bill that the Senate passed, bordering the aid to Ukraine. And, of course, Mike Johnson, he won't take it up. And I think his number one fear is not only Trump, but he's afraid one of the Republicans will challenge him.
Right. He's afraid of Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Right. Well, why doesn't Hakeem Jeffries approach Johnson? Says, look, this bill is so important. Says, on this issue only, if you get challenged, the Democrats will stand behind you, and we will not let them take the speakership away from you. Okay, I think the adults then would look like the Democrats would look like the adults in the room, and I would put a lot of pressure on the Republicans.
Yeah, it would. You've got to be very careful about those kinds of statements of support, though, because it could really backfire. I mean, it's entirely possible. If you get 2 or 3 really pissed off, disaffected Republicans, now that they've only got a very small majority in the House, particularly with George Santos gone, or being replaced by a Democrat, that you could end up with Speaker Hakeem Jeffries, even with a Republican majority. I mean, it's the vote of the majority of the House. I think it's pretty unlikely, but you've got a number of Republicans who have already announced that they're retiring, they're leaving politics, they're not coming back, and if just 2 or 3 of them decided that they were going to go along with a challenge to leadership, if Marjorie Taylor Greene lays down that challenge, that could be very interesting too. And so I don't think that Hakeem Jeffries wants to give away his support to Johnson when there's actually a chance he might replace Johnson. But we'll see. We'll see how it shakes out. Okay. Steve, thank you for the call. We'll be back on the other side of this break. Joe Biden is calling out Trump's NATO treason, and the Kremlin just threatened us.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at ThomHartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the HartmannReport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at ThomHartmann.com. So check them all out at ThomHartmann.com and HartmannReport.com.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Common Sense for the 21st Century by Roger Hallam. The subtitle, Only Nonviolent Rebellion Can Now Stop Climate Breakdown and Social Collapse. This is from the foreword. I was there for the past 20 years. Climate activism. It didn't work. We protested in our hundreds of millions. It didn't work. We raised billions to reach people and politicians. It didn't work. We signed countless online petitions. They didn't work. We looked to the United Nations to resolve the crisis. It didn't work. We trusted progressive politicians and their reforms. That didn't work. Al Gore had a big concert and a PR campaign. It didn't work. Countless NGOs, non-governmental organizations, did their best, and it didn't work. I worked with green NGO campaigns, champagne environmentalists, and lying politicians. I was wasting my time. I had a clue back in 2007 that there might be a fundamental flaw with the reformist approach. The problem with the political influence of the industrial billionaires like the Koch brothers and other fossil fuel bosses. It was another warm night in Los Angeles. I was invited to an exclusive event. A Tesla Roadster prototype was going to be shown to press and guests. We took turns riding around the block. I watched in amazement as the Tesla was at the end of the street in the blink of an eye, with barely a sound. I felt like a caveman seeing a television. Incredible. While I was working on a campaign in 2007, I had an idea for how to save the world with a massive music event and a huge fundraising effort led by celebrities to fund the biggest PR campaign to save the environment. It would be a huge global event, just like Live Aid. I sought out a prominent journalist at the Tesla event to tell about my scheme and bask in the glory of his praise. The journalist was Vijay Vithswaram from The Economist, now a life member of this Council on Foreign Relations. After listening carefully to my concept, he smiled and laughed. I was stunned. Laughter? How could I be so wrong? Vijay wasn't being cruel or unkind. He thought I was naive. He said, the fossil fuel industry has enough money to outspend any public relations campaign you might try by 100 times. He carried on talking, but I had stopped listening. I had my answer. He was right. Crestfallen, I sheepishly nodded and walked away. Over the next 12 years, I watched as fossil fuel companies used their vast financial capital to buy political parties, trick NGOs into fruitless schemes like the U.S. Cap and Trade Initiative, sow doubt about climate science in the public discourse, and slow policy reform to a snail's pace. Their strategy worked. As climate skepticism continued to spread, climate change mitigation dropped down voters' priorities. With Trump and Putin in power, it was over. I quit climate campaigning. Then I heard about Extinction Rebellion closing 5 bridges in London. Then they closed central London in April 2019. This was something different. I met Roger Hallam and he explained his ideas for a radical plan to create real change. This included, first, tell the truth. Climate skepticism was pushed by the mainstream media, which spread doubt on climate science like a plague, leaving inaction in its wake. The scale of the crisis is being played down, and we must get the truth out. Second, nonviolent civil disobedience. We need to get arrested, tens of thousands of us, more. No more protests, no more petitions. Instead, nonviolent civil disobedience, lots of it, and on a large scale. Close down cities until the politicians take action, or until the people do. Third, universalism. In other words, the ecological and climate crisis should not be owned by any political ideology, culture, age, or gender. As Roger Hallam says, we all have a stake in the future. We should all be allowed to engage in action. I was convinced. We need a new approach to save ourselves and the planet. We need to spark a worldwide rebellion. We need some common sense for the 21st century. That foreword was written by, quote, anonymous climate activist. So this now is the introduction to the book. It is time to grow up and see the world as it is. There are some things which are undeniably real. There are some things we cannot change, and one of those is the law of physics. Ice melts when the temperature increases. Crops die in a drought. Trees burn in forest fires. Because these things are real, we can also be certain about what the future holds. We are now heading into a period of extreme ecological collapse. Whether or not this leads to the extinction of the human species largely depends on whether revolutionary changes happen within our societies within the next decade. This is not a matter of ideology, but of simple math and physics. The United Nations has estimated that we need to reduce carbon emissions by half within a decade to have a 50% chance of avoiding a global catastrophe. Of course, this is likely to be an underestimate, as recent science shows permafrost melting 90 years earlier than forecasted and Himalayan glaciers melting twice as fast as expected. The book, Common Sense for the 21st Century, by Roger Hallam, the co-founder of the Extinction Rebellion. The subtitle, Only Nonviolent Rebellion Can Now Stop Climate Breakdown and Social Collapse.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome to the second hour of our program. So the Kremlin yesterday threatened to fire nuclear missiles at us. Not making that up. This was Dmitry Medvedev, who has taken turns with Putin being president back when they were honoring the Russian Constitution, which term limits the presidency. Then when Putin came back into office, they just changed the Constitution, so he doesn't need Medvedev anymore. But Medvedev is kind of his right-hand guy, right? And this is what he said. He said, attempts to return Russia to the borders of 1991 will lead to only one thing, toward a global war with Western countries using the strategic arsenal of our state in Kyiv, Berlin, London, Washington. He also added that hypersonic missiles would also strike, quote, all other beautiful historical places that have long been included in the flight targets of our nuclear triad. He went on to say, will we have the courage to do this if the disappearance of a 1,000-year-old country, our great motherland, is at stake, and the sacrifices made by the people of Russia over the centuries will be in vain? The answer is obvious. In other words, what Medvedev is saying here is that if Russia loses Crimea, which is essentially, I believe, based on everything I'm reading, what they're most flipped out about, because they've got this massive naval base there, in Crimea. If they lose Crimea, they're willing to start a nuclear war over that. Now, I'm skeptical. I don't present myself as some, great scholar or expert on international relations, but I've been on this planet for a few years and have seen this kind of thing go down. And this, by the way, this is not the first time that Putin threatened nuclear weapons. This is, I believe, the third or fourth time, and each time we've called their bluff. If you provide weaponry to the Ukrainians, there'll be nuclear war. We provided weaponry. If you provide them with those HIMARS missile systems, there'll be nuclear war. We provided them with the HIMARS nuclear system, or missile systems. I believe that there was a threat around high-performance jets. I'd have to go back and look. But the bottom line is the Kremlin is basically threatening us. And I'm frankly surprised. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see, actually, how this gets handled by Republicans, or if it just gets completely ignored. So far, I haven't seen any mention of this in the media, any prominent mention of it. And I have not heard one word from any Republican. Now, you could see where, somebody like Rand Paul, who has been just openly embracing Putin for years. I mean, he made a secret trip during the Trump presidency from the United States to Moscow to hand deliver to Putin's intelligence services some top secret documents that Donald Trump gave him to carry over there. We still have no idea what those documents were. Was it the 9-inch binder with all the Russian spies and Russian tradecraft that we know about? Is that is now missing? Was that it? Is that what Rand Paul took over there? We don't know. But, you know, I could see somebody like Rand Paul coming out and saying, see, guys, I told you, you're playing with fire. You need to just get out of Ukraine and stop funding them and let the Russians move in there and steal 1 million children and, you know, rape another couple 100,000 women and you know, murders the young men of military age and steal the country and just let them do it. I mean, that's essentially the message that's coming out of the Trump wing of the GOP right now. And it's kind of a variation on the message that we've been getting from the whole Putin faction. You know, Moscow Mike Johnson and Rand Paul and Mike Lee. And, you know, you've got a bunch of these Republicans now who are just openly embracing Putin. They're saying, to hell with America, to hell with American democracy. You know, democracy is overrated. So what if Ukraine is a democratic republic? We don't care about democracy. We're far more interested in having authoritarianism here, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's a grim one. It's a grim one. And meanwhile, somehow Donald Trump has tied his own death and his legal woes to the death of Alexei Navalny. This is pretty bizarre. Nikki Haley went on fire. First of all, you know, Putin orders Navalny murdered, and Navalny gets murdered, dies. A day or two goes by, and Donald Trump doesn't say a word because he's terrified of Vladimir Putin. I mean, Trump is scared to death of Putin. We don't know why. We don't know if he's being blackmailed or if Putin is holding out carrots or if it's, you know, and if he's being blackmailed, is it about the hundreds of millions of dollars that Russian oligarchs and Putin gave him in the 90s when he went bankrupt and the early 2000s? Or is it because they've got the PP tape from when he was in Moscow, you know, with the Miss Universe contest? Or is it something completely unrelated to those things? We don't know. But Trump is terrified of Putin. And so, you know, he didn't say a word after Navalny was killed until Nikki Haley went on Fox News. My guess is Trump was watching Fox News when this happened because Nikki Haley went on Fox and Friends, which is Trump's favorite show, and called him out. Just said, you know, he's afraid to say anything about Putin and about Navalny. And in fact, this is exactly what she said. She said, Nikki Haley said, it's amazing to me how weak in the knees he is when it comes to Putin. Because you look at the fact he has yet to say anything about Navalny's death. Putin murdered him. It's what he does to his political opponents. And Trump has yet to say anything about seizing Russian assets and allowing that money to go to Ukraine. Why would you not want to have those assets seized? It's sitting in Congress. He should be calling for that. He doesn't talk about anything. All he does is go on these late-night rants talking about his court cases. And you know, she goes on, right? She says, that's why I continue to say if Donald Trump is the nominee, he can't win. He won't win a general election. And the focus we need to is how we, you know, quack, quack, quack. And I think she's right. I don't think Donald Trump can win another national election. But that said, once she went on TV and called out Donald Trump for not talking about Navalny, Trump decided, okay, well, what the hell, I got to say something about Navalny. How do I write something over on my Nazi-infested social media site, failing Nazi-infested social media site, that includes Navalny's name, but that won't upset my overlord, Vladimir Putin, right? This is how Trump is thinking. So he writes this. This is what he wrote. This is Trump's finally giving in and acknowledging that Navalny has died. He won't say that Putin killed him, right? He's terrified. Like I said, Donald Trump is terrified of Vladimir Putin. So this is what he wrote. He says, the sudden death of Alexei Navalny has made me more and more aware of what is happening in our country. I said, what? This makes no sense. And then he goes on, you know, now that he's changed the subject, right, from Russia and Putin and Navalny, he goes, it is a slow, steady progression with crooked, radical left politicians, prosecutors, and judges leading us down a path to destruction. Open borders, rigged elections, grossly unfair courtroom decisions are destroying America. We are a nation in decline, a failing nation. MAGA 2024. Right. Well, he did mention Navalny's name. He did finally mention Navalny's name. But, yeah. Meanwhile, the Biden campaign has a new ad out that is absolutely fascinating. I will share a small part of it with you on the other side of this break. It's almost 15 minutes past the hour. And we'll also be picking up your phone calls. A lot going on in the world today, right? Stay with us.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's your media support group for We the People. Right back with your calls and more of the news of the day in just a moment. And welcome back. Picking up your calls here, Diane in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Hey, Diane, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I was just thinking, I'm a Cold War baby, too. I remember hiding under my desk at school and all. Mm-hmm. So Russia has always been, in a sense, frightening to me, whereas I think the younger people have a more abstract view of, right. Russia. But I propose in my mind that Putin and Trump are going to rule the world together. Putin will take the East hemisphere. Trump will take the West. And, of course, Trump will always answer to Putin. But, I mean, they hold the whole world's arsenal, you might as well say.
Yeah. No, that's clearly something that is on Trump's mind. For years now, he speaks glowingly of Kim Jong-un and Vladimir Putin and, President Xi in China. And then he trash talks our Democratic allies, small d Democratic allies.
Yeah, he wants to see himself on the level of all the other dictators. Yep. He admires them, and he wants to be part of one of them. I was wondering, too, with Putin and his making threats, could he take out our Internet, our online information?
Yes. In fact, if I was going to write a novel about what might happen with this kind of thing, the thing that Mike Turner flipped out about last week, the Republican chair of the Intelligence Committee, was that Putin is preparing to put satellites into outer space that are basically nuclear bombs. And if he were to set one of these off, there's two kinds of satellites. There's satellites that just rotate around the Earth and are constantly in different places. And then there's what's called geosynchronous satellites that are at an altitude where they're rotating relative to the Earth, but they're also rotating at the same speed as the Earth, and therefore they're always over one spot. And those are largely the satellites that are used for communications like the Internet. And so if he was to put a nuclear satellite-killing bomb just directly above the United States at that altitude, at the geosynchronous altitude, and set it off, it would take out all the satellites that are supplying Internet to the United States. He'd have to cut a couple of international cables, ocean floor cables, which probably wouldn't be much of a big deal. And I would think that would probably be the first thing that he would do.
That would have us at their mercy, at the mercy of who. Is that a reason why do you think Trump was so interested in the post office? Because that would take us back quite a few decades. And the post office is the way everybody back in the day had communication with the government and whatever.
I think Trump was interested in the post office because he wanted to prevent mail-in voting.
Do you think they'll ever sell out the assets of America?
If they can.
AKA privatizing, and the people who participated in taking down America the most will get the biggest opportunity as an oligarch to own whatever. Just piece it out.
Well, this is what DeJoy is working on: is breaking up and privatizing the post office. And of course, he owns a trucking company in the delivery business. So,
there are plenty of people with money that would like to get in on the sale. I'm sure.
Absolutely.
The selling off of it.
Absolutely.
Will look like Russia.
Yep. There you go.
Russian.
Diane, thank you for the call. Yep. Thank you very much. We'll be right back. It's, 19 and a half minutes past the hour. Back with you in just a moment. Stay with us. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. Welcome back. 20 minutes past the hour. So the Biden administration has a new campaign ad out that is taking it to Trump. The question is, how much impact will this have? Are we just preaching to the choir or not? But here's a clip from that ad, a piece of it.
For 75 years, NATO has been the most important military alliance in the world. It's been the cornerstone of America's security. It's how we won the Cold War and defeated the Soviet Union. And the only time NATO has invoked the sacred commitment of Article 5 was to stand with America after 9/11. Every president since Truman has been a rock-solid supporter of NATO, except for Donald Trump. Trump wants to walk away from NATO.
There we go. And he goes on along those lines. But that's and Joe Biden won't do that, presumably. So yeah, we'll see where this goes. Right? We'll see where this goes. All righty, let's pick up your calls. Paul in Ambler, Pennsylvania. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I wanted to talk about Taiwan and the tug of war over China wanting to reincorporate it into its overall territory versus the United States' stance on trying to prevent that. I think it should be obvious that Taiwan and China are, part and parcel together, and our interference in the area is causing more geopolitical upset than is necessary. And I think my prediction is we're on the way out of supporting that arrangement. Just to trace back a little bit, it used to be after World War II, the United States pretended that the tiny island of Taiwan, called Formosa, was China, the government of China, and China, which was taken over by Mao and the Communist Party of China, was not the legitimate ruler of the vast territory of China on the mainland of Eurasia.
Our perspective on that, Paul, was pretty straightforward. What we were saying is we will honor and recognize a democratic republic. We would rather not honor and recognize a communist dictatorship. And I'm astonished that you're saying here on this program that a communist dictatorship should take over a democratic nation. I don't get that.
Well, it's hardly a democratic nation if all you're looking at
Taiwan?
is
Taiwan has got one of the most vibrant democracies in the world. I've been there many times.
I'm sure you have, and I'm sure they have elections, but
they don't just have elections. They have a vigorous public debate about policy.
Yeah, well, who should get richer? Anyway,
Taiwan is a democratic republic, and just because it's off the coast of China, Japan's off the coast of China too. South Korea's off the coast of China. It's actually attached to China. Are you saying that China should take them too?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm talking about Taiwan and that as an issue. No one is proposing the Philippines and the Japanese to be incorporated into China. Those are your words, not mine. What I'd like to continue to say is simply we're getting out of the Taiwan support business, and how I know is what we're shown. They're building the computer chip fabrication sites, not only all over America. Intel wants to put one in Israel. Europe's building them. As soon as we're done building all the computer chip sites that the West needs, Taiwan will be left with obsolete factories, and most of the people in Taiwan that are rich will leave, leaving behind all the people who had a democracy, the same way the British Crown left behind everyone in Hong Kong that had a democracy.
Well, we'll see. I'm skeptical.
I really don't think it's going to go any other way.
I am very skeptical, Paul, because the people of Taiwan really love democracy. They really love their democracy. They've got a pretty strong military. I realize China could cut them off. They could bring them to their knees in a second, and the only thing that's preventing that is our presence in the region and Taiwan's allies, basically us and Australia. But whether we're going to abandon another democracy or not, I hate to think that we would do that. Paul, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Florindo in Fairfield, Iowa. Hey, Florindo, what's up?
Oh, hi, Tom. Thank you for taking my call. I want to say something that probably is familiar to everybody listening, but it's also going to be objectionable to many people, and that is about guns, that ownership of a gun is a license to kill. And the reason I say that is because once we have a loaded gun, nothing can stop us from using it to kill. The only law that would take away the right to shoot somebody is the law against gun ownership.
That doesn't make sense. There's lots of people who own guns and don't go shooting people.
Right. That doesn't mean they can't.
Well, it means they're physically capable of it, but it doesn't mean that they legally can.
No, it doesn't mean that they legally can, but the law against it won't stop them from doing it if they want.
Well, if they want, I mean but that doesn't mean that they're given a license to kill. But I'm not sure what the point is you're trying to make here, Florida. What's your point?
The point is that they outlawed open carry and gun ownership in the Old West and Dodge City and so forth, was to do away with all these. But last week, I think it was on Ari Melber on MSNBC. He had the former Secretary of State of the state of Missouri on about right after the Kansas City Chiefs victory celebration shooting. And the guy said he was very disappointed that there were all these shootings going on because there was only one little law that was preventing more control over guns, and that is a law that was passed by the GOP under Bush, George W. Bush, in the 2000s. It took away the liability of the manufacturers.
Yeah, that's right. It was either 2003 or 2005. And right now there's only two industries in the United States that have absolute immunity from lawsuits around liability. The social media companies and the gun manufacturers, and they're both really messing with us. Thank you, Florindo.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be right back with more of your calls in just a moment. Stay tuned. Today we're reading from Behold America by Sarah Churchwell, The Entangled History of America First and the American Dream. This is from the prologue. On Monday, 30 May 1927, a cool day with showers forecast, New Yorkers were gathering for the annual Memorial Day parades around the city. It was only 9 years since the end of the European War, into which America had been so reluctantly drawn, and Europe had suddenly become closer than ever before. Precisely 10 days earlier, Charles Lindbergh had completed the first solo flight across the Atlantic in the spirit of St. Louis, and no one had yet stopped celebrating. Front pages around the country reported that Lucky Lindy had been mobbed in London, greeted by rapturous crowds of 150,000. Few Americans were talking about much else than the newest national hero, but in New York that day, different kinds of mobs were about to gather. Around 8 a.m., a group of Italian immigrants living in the Bronx set out for the elevated train on their way to Manhattan to join the parade. But they were not going to honor the American soldiers who had died in the service of their country. They were supporters of Mussolini, planning to join 400 American fascists who were marching in Manhattan's Memorial Day parade as part of the official fascist movement in the United States. They had been invited by the parade's organizers, to the outrage of many anti-fascists, including Italian nationalists and anarchists who threatened violence if the invitation wasn't rescinded. It wasn't. Like all his fellow fascists intending to march that day, Joseph Carisi was wearing the black shirt uniform, sporting leather boots, jodhpurs, a black cap, and carrying a steel-tipped riding crop.
When he stopped to buy a newspaper, Carisi was jumped by 2 men, stabbed in the neck, and left to die on the sidewalk. Another fascist, Nicholas Amoroso, who was running either to catch up with his group or away from the killers, reports vary, was shot 4 times, once right through the heart. One of the 2 murdered men had served in the American Army during the Great War, the other with the Italian Army, papers reported. The parade they had meant to join took place without them, a fascist delegation of several hundred that was guarded by police to, quote, avert disorder. After the parade, the American black shirts returned to their headquarters in the heart of Times Square. There, another of the fascists standing outside was set upon by 3 men. He defended himself with his riding crop as his fellow black shirts charged out brandishing clubs and whips, chasing the assailant through the theater traffic in Times Square, who fled as the black-shirted mob tore through the traffic. 100 fascists, reported the New York Times, rushed the attackers. A melee ensued that was quickly dispersed by the police. There was also violence in Brooklyn, where a parade of fascisti marched from the Angelo Rizza Fascista League at 274 Troutman Street in Bushwick. The LA Times reported several hundred men were parading, including 40 or 50 in the black shirt uniform. Fights broke out between supporters and protesters mingling on the sidewalks, and an anti-fascist was found lying on the ground, stabbed in the back. He survived and identified a fascist as his assailant. Accompanied by 30 police reserves to forestall violence, the marchers made their way through Brooklyn, stopping at the Wilson Avenue station, where the fascisti came to attention and gave the fascist salute. They ended at a Roman Catholic church, where the priest blessed them under large American and Italian flags, while the police remained on guard. The biggest outbreak of violence that Memorial Day, however, occurred in Queens, where it centered around a different right-wing group, not Italian Americans, but the self-proclaimed 100% American kind. By 1927, the Ku Klux Klan had spread across the United States since its rebirth in Georgia 12 years earlier. The first Klan was formed in the immediate aftermath of the Civil War, as former Confederate soldiers in Tennessee created a secret society to promote white supremacism, and terrorize the newly freed slaves in the South during the Reconstruction era. The name is generally believed to have originated from the Greek word for circle, kuklos, while Klan pays homage to the mystified Celtic heritage supposedly shared by white Southerners. Within a decade or two, the first Klan had been successfully suppressed by law enforcement and died out by the turn of the century. But in 1915, it was resuscitated in Georgia, and by the early 1920s, the second Klan had achieved a powerful political presence in the United States, not only in the South, but across the country. I would add this is because of 1915, the movie Birth of a Nation came out. The Klan had an active presence in New York City and Long Island by 1927, with favorite slogans, which they even attempted to copyright at various points. That year, the Klan was calling attention to the fact that it first announced the program of 100% Americanism and of America First. They were not, in fact, the first to adopt these mottos, as this book will show. In 1927, both phrases had been around for a decade or more. But as far as the Klan busily copywriting hate was concerned, America First belonged to them. And on Memorial Day in Queens, 1,000 or so of them had gathered to march, many in white robes and hoods. They were accompanied by 400 women from the so-called Clavana, the feminine branch of the Klan. Some of the reported 20,000 spectators in Queens that day objected to the Klan's presence, as others defended their right to march. Scuffles broke out, and it turned into a riot. Women fought women, and spectators fought the policemen and the Klansmen as their desire dictated, said a newspaper. Klan banners were shredded, and 5 of their number were arrested, said initial reports, while a few others were caught up in the confusion as well. The book, Behold America, Sarah Churchwell.
Hey, if you like the rants that I open the show with every day, they're typically published over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. You know, between 40 years of Ronald Reagan's neoliberalism destroying the American middle class and all the just horrors of January 6th and the Trump presidency, America's waking up, and that's a really good thing. There's actually, some books coming out about this. Mine, The Hidden History of Democracy. Neil Howe's The Fourth Turning is here. And it looks like a moment of American renaissance is upon us, if our media doesn't screw it up, which raises the question, can we have democracy and Fox News? Can the two coexist? Like, you know, when Fox News runs chyrons saying that essentially Joe Biden is a wannabe dictator who's throwing Trump in jail because he's his political opponent. There's a whole rant about this and an in-depth analysis of what can we do with regard to repairing our media here in the United States over at HartmannReport.com. I think you'll find it interesting. Check it out. "35 minutes past the hour, picking up your calls here. John in Poulsbo, Washington. Hey, John, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Thanks a lot for taking my call. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
We've talked about this a little bit before, and this is about, and you were talking about this previously. 40% of our population, through some surveys, say they would love to have a king. You know, and we've talked about that before, but I don't think people understand that we don't get a benevolent king usually.
Right.
Trump, just take a look at the way he's living and the gold around him and everything else, and trying to get his kids and everything involved, and, you know, and then work up through the hierarchy and everything. He wants to be king. Is he going to be a benevolent king? He says he is, but everybody doubts that. And when we made our Constitution, we had enough kings.
Yeah, and one person's benevolence is another person's tyranny. I mean, if he's benevolent toward his followers, he's going to be anti-benevolent toward the rest of us, frankly.
Well, he says he's going to be benevolent to his followers, but has he done that? No, he hasn't.
Right.
His main followers he's benevolent to are the very rich, the 1%ers, and the big corporations. So consequently, you know, this just doesn't work. Our Constitution said we've been there, done that. No, we shouldn't do this again. This just doesn't work. They're having a king. So you need term limits, Citizens United, and redo the tax code. You know, those are the first three steps Biden should do and be pushing. You know, of course, he better not say anything. He's going to, Congress going to go berserk if he says something about term limits. You know.
Well, term limits actually is a bad idea, John. Term limits strengthens the power of lobbyists, which is why Republicans and the Koch brothers have been pushing term limits for years and years and years.
I really think so. I mean, because in my mind,
we've got 7 states now that have done it, and the proof is in. It's easily measured. What happens is if you've got long-term members of a legislative body, they become the institutional memory of that body. And when new people come in, you know, get elected, they find a mentor. They hook up with somebody who's been there for a long time and knows where the bodies are buried and where the bathrooms are and how to get things done. When term limits are imposed, particularly relatively short ones, you know, less than 8 years or 12 years, when term limits are imposed, what happens is that institutional memory pretty much vanishes. And as a consequence, the one group of people who have been in place for decades are the lobbyists. They don't go with term limits. And so what happens is the legislators have to increasingly rely on lobbyists for the information that they need to function. It's just, you know, term limits weaken democratic governments. But he hung up. But in any case, but I'm with you on you know, our tax code. I'm absolutely with you on that. Russell in Bay City, Texas. Hey, Russell, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Yeah, I kind of came up with several other things since I've been listening on hold. But, you know, first thing I wanted to say, and I want to speak in terms of the sanctions and how, you know, we can actually put some pressure on Vladimir. But you know, one thing I didn't understand, and being the nice guy that Joe is, and he's spent his time in government, and you know, is he getting older? Is his mind might not be there? Has he lost his stuff in his body? Or what people don't fail to understand, that a speech impediment at an early age, which we can't hold that against anybody. But, you know, when it came to Detroit, you had a caller calling in. He would have been one of the first people that I would have thought Kamala or somebody would have told him, or even Brock, that, hey, man, you got to remove this guy. He's not our friend.
Well,
you know,
the problem is only the Postal Board of Governors can remove the Postmaster General. Biden now has a chance to nominate, to appoint 2 new members of the Postal Board of Governors. And I understand that process is moving forward. I wish he would do it a lot faster.
good because this was part of the thing. It amazes me how everybody had the with Donald. It was basically a failed reality show. wasn't the mayor, wasn't the governor, hadn't even held an office as a dog catcher, and then here he is down to Putin. And it's just, I hate to say it, but it's also all over the place, Tom. It's just the poop show of all time, just when you can't dream it up, Yeah. But the problem I have is what's the one thing that we see with these dictators, whether it be Ping or whether it be, whoever throughout the planet, it's their money. You got to follow the money trail. You got to follow the clout. They want to be the fame, the fortune, and we had put some pressure on Putin. We saw this when we first with the oligarch and the tariffs and stuff, and he was under a lot of duress. But the problem that I'm seeing now that things are, I won't say calming down, but through the straits and the oceans where Indians from India, they're buying the oil at a 13 times rate. China, aren't there any sanctions or something we can do to these countries that are actually making Vladimir filthy rich again, which defeats the purpose of what we're doing with Ukraine? And here we're trying to pass bills when the India's refining the oil and selling it back to us in the most diverse places on the country. And we've got our own political party fighting amongst each other, whether it be, AOC or Tlaib or whoever. We say we're gaining votes, but are we really gaining votes? It's a poop show from hell, Tom. And I don't know if we're going to sort it out, but I do know one thing. At some point, and I'm not talking out against Kamala or Joe, but they're going to have to put their big boy pants on. And there's only one way to confront a bully, because it wasn't that long ago that George Bush was sitting there drinking beers and singing songs and yucking it up with Vladimir. So anyway, we've got to confront these bullies head on, and then that's how you deal with them. And you hurt them in their pocket. And until we can do that, because Donald's idea of making America great was to come in and put tariffs and sanctions on all of our allies. And where did that get us? That got us a worldwide virus that somebody had been holding on to. And I firmly believe this.
Okay. Yeah. I got it, Russell. Thank you. Deborah in Cleveland, Ohio. Hey, Deborah, what's on your mind today?
Good afternoon, Mr. Hartmann. Thank you for taking my call. I may be a little all over the place, so my apologies before I get started. I'm concerned about the Americans being low, moderate, and informational voters, and that we are not paying attention and probably won't until, say, August or September. I'm taking issue with that a little bit because we are paying attention. We are listening, at least. We are hearing. We're being bombarded with information every day, all day. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Yeah. We are being told about what Trump and the Republicans are doing. If you're spending a minute telling us what Trump and the Republicans are doing, spend an equal minute telling us what President Biden and what you, the Democratic elected official, is doing. It has been said sometimes voters vote against their own best interest. That's because they're not being informed. President Biden and his administration are talking to us on a national level and representing us on an international world stage and level. We have federally elected officials, state, county, city elected. What are you doing? Why are you not talking to us? A caller a couple of minutes ago some time ago had mentioned about the internet and how our information could be interfered with. There's still billboards. There are PSA announcements. Here's a novel idea. There are town halls. Talk with people. Talk to people. That I think that's where I am. And this just mentioning only abortion rights. No, it's not just abortion rights. It's the rights of Americans. It's our right to have the ability to vote as we want to, health care, Social Security. And why is Oregon or one of the only states that is mandatory mail-in is
There are 5 states now, including Utah. So, Deborah, thank you for the call. It's 44 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Talk media for the sane among us. We'll be right back with your calls. Stay with us. And welcome back. Jessica in Chicago. Hey, Jessica, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Thank you for letting me tell you some news that's not really out there.
Okay.
In the New York civil case where Judge Ingram ruled Trump owes New York $355 million, where the Trump lawyers argued no harm ever came from all this fraud, Deutsche Bank had lent Trump over $2 billion, and Thomas Bauer, the head of Deutsche Bank American Wealth Management Division, who oversaw Trump's private banker, he committed suicide. He was only 55, and he hung himself. But that's not all. That's not all the suicides. Then the very day German authorities marched into Deutsche Bank headquarters, Iver Rihi, head of Estonia's operations, was found dead by suicide too. Then the third death was another Deutsche Bank executive in London, and his name was William S. Brockschmidt, committed suicide by hanging himself too. And I can't stand when the news repeats itself and says no harm was done by the idiot Trump's fraud.
Right.
Sadly, our news media never covers the other side of the story.
Yeah. Excellent point, Jessica. Excellent point. And there's also the harm done to Deutsche Bank in that they could have charged a heck of a lot more interest if Trump had filled out his forms properly, if he hadn't lied. And so there are those losses. And then there's also people that Deutsche Bank might have loaned money to instead of Trump who didn't get the loans because Trump was getting them because Trump had lied. So, I think you've got multiple levels of injury that you can define.
Yes, and Kushner was part of that too. He knew a woman at Deutsche Bank, so he made sure that his father-in-law got to talk to her.
Yep.
It was all corrupt.
Yep, I agree. Well said. Thank you very much, Jessica. Zeke in Portland. Hey, Zeke, what's up?
Well, Tom, I spoke with you last week about this, and I got the impression from what you said. Actually, it was more than an impression. I mean, you pretty much said that you agree with me and Mark Milley that if the Russians are allowed to conquer Ukraine, which is now happening, that they're not going to stop with Ukraine.
Correct.
They have said Andrei Mordbachev, who was in the thick of it on Friday when the Ukrainians withdrew from Adbika, he's the one who said, after Ukraine, we're going to liberate Eastern Europe.
Correct.
And if we're still members of NATO, and we probably will be, even if Trump is reelected, because Senators Rubio and Kaine attached a rider to the National Defense Authorization Act a couple of months ago that says that it will require a 2/3 vote of both houses of Congress for a president to take us out of NATO.
Right.
Okay? And therefore, it would be a really good idea if we enabled Ukraine to win this war. And Joe Biden has the means at hand to do that. I'm talking about tens of thousands of M26 cluster rockets in warehouses in Germany, compatible with the HIMARS and the M270 MLRS launchers that the Ukrainians have plenty of.
Right.
And there's the music.
Well, finish your thought.
I'm going to people need to do a Google search on M26 rockets for Ukraine and read the article by Dan Rice about what these things can do. And people need to bring pressure on Biden to give these weapons to Ukraine.
I'm with you, Zeke. I'm with you. Thank you. We'll be right back. Help support progressive radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting Progressive Talk Radio and tag You're It. So a lot of people are wondering, why is it in America that we can't have nice things? Why don't we have, the same things every other democracy has? Every other democracy in the world has a national health care system of some form, and everybody is covered. We don't. We've got 27 million uninsured people and over 100 million underinsured people. Why is that? Why is it that every other country in the world offers college education very inexpensively, if not for free, and for here you go to debt? Why is it that we've got our public schools crumbling and other countries are doing well? Why is it that we've got Medicare being taken apart by this Medicare Advantage scam and nobody will do anything about it? Well, it turns out the reason why it boils down to one thing, one Supreme Court decision, Citizens United, legalizing the bribery of our politicians. There's a whole rant about this over at HartmannReport.com. I think you're going to find it very, very useful. Check it out. 10 minutes before the hour, picking up your calls here. Bill in Clifton, New Jersey. Hey, Bill, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how you doing?
Good. What's on your mind?
Good. I just want to remind you that the theory of everything is equality.
I don't know what you mean.
Well, if you wanted to boil down to one thought, since we're a country founded in ideas, it's equality. Everything else, freedom, liberty, anything else comes from equality.
Or at least equality of opportunity.
Of everything. People, whatever it is, it's the biggest strength and the most positive thing in the world that I can think of. But anyway, this $300 billion that's being held of Russia's, should there be any argument not to hand it over to Ukraine? I mean, the only people opposing it are Japan and a couple other countries whose money it's supposed to go to.
Right.
And the central banks were afraid that if you can't get money from a dictator, it's bad for business.
I think it's also it also contradicts some of the treaties that we've signed. But frankly, I don't know the details of that. I've read that we can't just give that money to Ukraine because technically it's not ours. I mean, we've impounded it, but we have not yet completed the legal process to claim it.
Right.
There's a distinction there, and that could take a long time.
Right. But the other side of it is that they don't need money; they need weapons.
Yep.
And because they're now improvising, building their own weapons, in Europe they're ramping up production of weapons.
Yep.
We're going to be out of the armaments business, and we won't be able to control it like we did before.
Which may not be a terrible thing.
Yeah. What's that?
It may not be a terrible thing.
Except for whoever controls it is better be responsible.
Well, I think it'll be the Germans and the French. They've got the largest industrial base. Maybe the British. I'm not sure, but somebody is. But I don't think that we're going to basically surrender that position, Bill. I think that it's just the question of what can we do with the $300 million. But with the earlier caller who was saying, give Russia the cluster bombs or whatever they're called that work with the HIMARS rockets. I don't know why we're not doing that. And there's got to be a reason. I mean, I just don't know what it is. Bill, I need to move along, but thank you for the call. Carl in Greenville, Michigan. Hey, Carl, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, I was wondering, what do you think of Jamie Raskins as a presidential candidate?
I wouldn't object to him. I've never seen him, reach for that kind of power, that kind of position. My sense of it is that he's happy where he is. Maybe he would want to end up in the Senate, but I didn't know that he had any presidential ambitions. Why do you ask, Carl?
Well, he seems to have his stuff wired pretty good.
Oh, yeah, he's a very smart man.
He knows the dirt on the Republicans and calls them out on it.
Yep.
Which you don't see from all the other guys sitting around him.
Yeah, no, and this guy's a constitutional law professor. I mean, he knows what he's talking about, too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and he's
Hey,
calling
I got a
out.
quickie for you here on Michigan. We got a guy trying to pass a bill through. He'll probably sneak it through. And what he wants to do is have the Republican head guys pick the people that run for office.
As opposed to primaries, you mean? Go back to the smoke-filled rooms?
Yeah, for the state.
Yeah. For just the GOP or for both parties?
Well, it didn't say in the article in the paper.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Blow up the primaries. If you can find out more about it, Carl, let me know, and I'll see what I can do with what I can find on that article. Thank you. Roosevelt in Chicago. Hey, Roosevelt, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom.
Hey, Roosevelt.
Three things. I called in 2017 and promoted the concept that Russian money from the fallen Russian Empire in the 90s was going to fund Trump because they saw it as an opportunity to gain power here in revenge for the United States helping them being defeated.
Yeah,
and
they did that.
They said it was due to drug laundering money.
Yeah, well, they were pumping money through the NRA.
Money, when he went bankrupt. But the two are not mutually exclusive upon reflection.
Right.
So, it's possible he could have got Russian money through drug laundering.
Well, he got, the NRA laundered money for Donald Trump from Russia.
Yes, it does.
I mean, that's established.
Right.
I don't know why they didn't lose their nonprofit
that?
status, but.
Have you heard that George Soros is buying Odyssey?
Is buying what?
Odyssey.
Obviously?
The second largest radio network in America. George Soros is buying Odyssey.
Really?
Yeah.
I know nothing
it was in a
about
New York Post article.
Huh. I will. Hey, Sean's shaking her head. Yes, I'll have to look that up. That would be very good news if they own radio stations. Is this a network that owns radio stations?
Right.
Wow.
He'll probably put you on.
Yeah, who knows? Is this the old Cumulus network? Is this the CBS network became the Cumulus network and that became something else? Is that what this is, or is it? Because I'm not recognizing the name.
Odyssey, Audacy. Right.
Yeah, I'll have to look it up. I don't pay a lot of attention to my own industry. Probably should pay more attention to it. But we're kind of operating in our own little silo here. Roosevelt, thanks for the tip on that. I've got to go look that up now during the break.
Have you heard of the sacrifice zones for the land-based missiles in Nevada, Nebraska?
I have not.
No.
I'll have to look that one up too. Roosevelt, I'm sorry I'm out of time, but thanks for the tip. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Is corporate ethics an oxymoron? Do you have to be a jerk to be a successful CEO? Exploitation.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
reading from Behold America by Sarah Churchwell, The Entangled History of America First and the American Dream. This is from the prologue. On Monday, 30 May 1927, a cool day with showers forecast, New Yorkers were gathering for the annual Memorial Day parades around the city. It was only 9 years since the end of the European War, into which America had been so reluctantly drawn, and Europe had suddenly become closer than ever before. Precisely 10 days earlier, Charles Lindbergh had completed the first solo flight across the Atlantic in the spirit of St. Louis, and no one had yet stopped celebrating. Front pages around the country reported that Lucky Lindy had been mobbed in London, greeted by rapturous crowds of 150,000. Few Americans were talking about much else than the newest national hero, but in New York that day, different kinds of mobs were about to gather. Around 8 a.m., a group of Italian immigrants living in the Bronx set out for the elevated train on their way to Manhattan to join the parade. But they were not going to honor the American soldiers who had died in the service of their country. They were supporters of Mussolini, planning to join 400 American fascists who were marching in Manhattan's Memorial Day parade as part of the official fascist movement in the United States. They had been invited by the parade's organizers, to the outrage of many anti-fascists, including Italian nationalists and anarchists who threatened violence if the invitation wasn't rescinded. It wasn't. Like all his fellow fascists intending to march that day, Joseph Carisi was wearing the black shirt uniform, sporting leather boots, jodhpurs, a black cap, and carrying a steel-tipped riding crop. When he stopped to buy a newspaper, Carisi was jumped by two men, stabbed in the neck, and left to die on the sidewalk. Another fascist, Nicholas Amoroso, who was running either to catch up with his group or away from the killers, reports vary, was shot 4 times, once right through the heart. One of the 2 murdered men had served in the American Army during the Great War. The other with the Italian Army, papers reported. The parade they had meant to join took place without them, a fascist delegation of several hundred that was guarded by police to, quote, avert disorder. After the parade, the American black shirts returned to their headquarters in the heart of Times Square. There, another of the fascists standing outside was set upon by 3 men. He defended himself with his riding crop as his fellow black shirts charged out, brandishing clubs and whips, chasing the assailant through the theater traffic in Times Square, who fled as the black-shirted mob tore through the traffic. 100 fascists, reported the New York Times, rushed the attackers. A melee ensued that was quickly dispersed by the police. There was also violence in Brooklyn, where a parade of fascisti marched from the Angelo Rizza Fascista League at 274 Troutman Street in Bushwick. The LA Times reported several hundred men were parading, including 40 or 50 in the black shirt uniform. Fights broke out between supporters and protesters mingling on the sidewalks, and an anti-fascist was found lying on the ground, stabbed in the back. He survived and identified a fascist as his assailant. Accompanied by 30 police reserves to forestall violence, the marchers made their way through Brooklyn, stopping at the Wilson Avenue station, where the fascisti came to attention and gave the fascists salute. They ended at a Roman Catholic church, where the priest blessed them under large American and Italian flags, while the police remained on guard. The biggest outbreak of violence that Memorial Day, however, occurred in Queens, where it centered around a different right-wing group, not Italian Americans, but the self-proclaimed 100% American kind. By 1927, the Ku Klux Klan had spread across the United States since its rebirth in Georgia 12 years earlier. The first Klan was formed in the immediate aftermath of the Civil War, as former Confederate soldiers in Tennessee created a secret society to promote white supremacism, and terrorize the newly freed slaves in the South during the Reconstruction era. The name is generally believed to have originated from the Greek word for circle, kuklos, while Klan pays homage to the mystified Celtic heritage supposedly shared by white Southerners. Within a decade or two, the first Klan had been successfully suppressed by law enforcement and died out by the turn of the century. But in 1915, it was resuscitated in Georgia, and by the early 1920s, the second Klan had achieved a powerful political presence in the United States, not only in the South, but across the country. I would add this is because of 1915, the movie Birth of a Nation came out. The Klan had an active presence in New York City and Long Island by 1927, with favorite slogans, which they even attempted to copyright at various points. That year, the Klan was calling attention to the fact that it first announced the program of 100% Americanism and of America First. They were not, in fact, the first to adopt these mottos, as this book will show. In 1927, both phrases had been around for a decade or more. But as far as the Klan busily copywriting hate was concerned, America First belonged to them. And on Memorial Day in Queens, 1,000 or so of them had gathered to march, many in white robes and hoods. They were accompanied by 400 women from the so-called Clavana, the feminine branch of the Klan. Some of the reported 20,000 spectators in Queens that day objected to the Klan's presence as others defended their right to march. Scuffles broke out, and it turned into a riot. Women fought women, and spectators fought the policemen and the Klansmen as their desire dictated, said a newspaper. Klan banners were shredded, and 5 of their number were arrested, said initial reports, while a few others were caught up in the confusion as well. The book, Behold America, Sarah Churchwell.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the third hour of our program here today on this beautiful President's Day. New York lobbyists aiding and abetting the climate crisis. This is an amazing story. It's over at The Guardian by Ava Sassani. And the new research reveals that dozens of New York universities, hospitals, museums, and nonprofits. Now, they only did this in New York State, but I'm sure it's true of every state in the union. Dozens of these universities, hospitals, museums, and nonprofits are employing lobbyists who also work for fossil fuel companies, which is to say, which some say is blatantly aiding and abetting the climate crisis. This is a new report from F-, which is a database of state-level lobbying disclosures released last year, and Little Sis, a project created by the nonprofit corporate and government accountability watchdog Public Accountability Initiative. New York University, for example, which has a $5 billion endowment, shares its lobbyists with 6 fossil fuel companies. Tobacco Free Kids Action Fund works with the same New York-based lobbying firm as Koch Industries, known for its prolific history of climate denial and pollution of American air and water. The new museum, featuring endangered plants and animals, employs the same lobbying firm as BP America. Last year, I'm quoting now from this article in The Guardian, last year Brown & Weintraub, one of the top paid lobbying firms in New York, helped the American Petroleum Institute oppose the creation of a super fund that would generate $3 billion annually for disaster recovery and climate resiliency projects. Brown & Weintraub also works with Google, which last year ramped up its public commitment to environmental causes. So, yeah, we'll hire these lobbyists who are working against the climate, and then we're going to proclaim that we're in favor of the climate. It just doesn't make any sense, right? In 2022 alone, Google shared lobbying firms with fossil fuel clients in 17 states. Nationwide, a whopping 1,500 lobbyists are working on behalf of fossil fuel companies while simultaneously representing hundreds of Democratic cities, universities, and tech giants. F- confirmed that there is no provision in the New York lobbying laws that prohibits a lobbyist from working both for and against a bill at the same time. But you got to wonder, if you hire a lobbying firm to promote your idea that there should be, caps on fossil fuel production or something like that, and that same lobbying firm is working for BP, arguing that there should be no caps on fossil fuel production, just for example. What does that mean? I mean, how do you deal with that? On the one hand. On the other hand, the lobbying firms would say, hey, like lawyers, you wouldn't go to a law firm and say, I would like to hire you to do my will, but you did defend a murderer a couple of years ago, and I'm no fan of murder. Except that lobbying is kind of a very different thing than just, being a law firm. Although a lot of these lobbying firms actually started out as law firms. A lot of them actually still are law firms. Excuse me. So, I don't know. It's going to be one of those, how is this going to turn out, things. But I'm really pleased that this organization, Little Sis, is drawing attention to this. Lobbying firms that are promoting the destruction of our planet, frankly, should not get another nickel, in my opinion, from any group that's aligned with the Democratic Party or any group that's aligned with the idea of, we're in favor of life on Earth and we're opposed to destroying life on Earth. Meanwhile, speaking of the environment, as it were, chlormequat. You ever heard of this? Chlormequat? It's a pesticide that disrupts the reproductive system and fetal growth in animals. Now, there have never been studies done on humans, so we don't know, but typically anything that causes birth defects and fetal abnormalities and disrupts reproductive ability of mice and cats and dogs and things also does it to people. And so this chemical is not supposed to be used on food in the United States. It's okay to use it for ornamental plants. You can put this chlormequat on your poinsettias, but you can't put it on your potatoes. Except 77 out of 96 urine samples taken between 2017 and 2023 found, this is from the environmental group, the environmental working group, found this chemical, chlormequat, in the urine of human beings. And then they started testing foods. What foods are the vector through which this stuff is getting into our food supply, into our bodies and ultimately coming out as urine. And it turned out that 92% of oat-based foods sold in May of 2023, which was the month that they did this survey, including Quaker Oats and Cheerios, contained chlormequat. Studies have found that it can damage the reproduction system and disrupt fetal growth in animals. The EPA allows chlormequat to be used on ornamental plants only, not food crops. However, its use has been allowed since 2018 on imported oats. So this would be the Trump EPA gave them an exception, and apparently they're still using it. The nonprofit advocacy group said, until the government fully protects consumers, you can reduce your exposure to chlormequat by choosing products made with organic oats, which are grown without synthetic pesticides such as chlormequat. Quaker Oats, by the way, is a division of Pepsi. So not exactly your health food company, but shouldn't be all that strange. And finally, in vitro fertilization in Alabama is apparently now on the way out. The anti-abortion movement has been rather outspokenly opposed for years to in vitro fertilization. And the reason why is because when you do in vitro fertilization, what you do is you give mom a bunch of hormones that cause the production of a bunch of eggs. You extract those eggs and you put them in a petri dish with sperm from dad and you let them connect to each other. And then you carefully pick out the 4 or 5 embryos that are now growing that look like they're strong and vigorous and they're going to do well. And you take the rest of them and you can freeze them. But the 4 or 5 that you use, you implant in mom. And, if more than one grows, you make a decision. Are we going to have twins or triplets or quadruplets, or are we going to abort all but one of the fetuses? But because not all of these fertilized eggs end up as human beings, the anti-abortion freaks have been just opposed to this because they view these fertilized eggs as fully human. And if the law were to ever acknowledge that, to recognize fertilized eggs as human, as being human beings, as having the legal rights of human beings, that would mean that you can't do IVF anymore because you have to pour a bunch of them down the drain when you do it. Well, it just happened. Alabama, the Alabama Supreme Court just ruled that under the Wrongful Death of a Minor Act, that this law that prosecutes people for killing children, basically, can be applied to people who are getting in vitro fertilization. In this case, the three couples, Jason and Emily LePage, William and Carolyn Fond, and Felicia Burdick Asane and Scott Asane, went to the Center for Reproductive Medicine in Alabama for IVF procedures. Each couple had embryos created. Each went on to have 2 children from some of those embryos, leaving the rest in storage. And in 2020, a patient from an adjacent hospital went wandering through the clinic's halls, made their way into the freezer storage room, removed some of the embryos, and dropped them, destroying them. So these 3 couples sued, saying, you just killed our babies. And the Alabama Supreme Court heard the case on appeal and found for the couples holding that the death of their embryos counted as wrongful deaths of minors under Alabama's law. So this is going to get really, really weird. Keep an eye on this. It's just, the Dobbs decision just opened the door to all kinds of wacky stuff. And, this being right up at the top of that list. So keep an eye on what's going on with this. All that said, what's on your mind? I'll pick up your calls on the other side of this break. A lot to talk about, a lot going on in the world. Not to mention some wild weather apparently in Florida. We'll be back with your calls on the other side of the break. Stay with us. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, the place where despair is not an option.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be right back with your thoughts. And welcome back. Tony in Long Island, New York. Hey, Tony, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. How you doing today?
Good. What's up?
I got 3 quick questions. I'll blow through them quick so I can get an answer from you. One, how do you think Trump v. Anderson is going to turn out now that they've already argued a case? That's the 14th Amendment case. Second question is...
Well, let's just take them one at a time. I am guessing that the Supreme Court will figure out a way to keep Trump on the ballot.
Okay. I had a feeling that...
What technicality they're going to use, I don't know, but I would be very surprised if they took him off the ballot. Although I think he should be taken off the ballot.
Yes, I think many of us that interpret the Constitution, that interpret the amendment the way it's written, believe that as well. There's another case coming up that a lot of people haven't made. I'm trying to recall the name of it. Maybe you can help me with this one. But the Supreme Court is supposed to hear a case where I believe currently the FDA and the FCC, if there's no current law or statutes on there, then automatically you defer to whatever is stated regarding said drug or that law. And I believe there's going to be a court fight regarding that, so that that particular clause, that deferment, would be taken away.
You're talking about the Chevron deference?
Chevron deference, yes. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm very concerned about that. If, because Clarence Thomas is on record, he wants to do away with it. The Chevron deference basically authorizes, it's a Supreme Court ruling that authorizes federal agencies like the EPA, USDA, FDA to make their own rules. And these so-called originalists are arguing that that's not right, that Congress should be making the rules and the agencies should simply enforce them. It'll create insane chaos, which is exactly what, the fossil fuel industry, for example, the chemical industry, it's exactly what they want.
That's what I thought as well. So I was concerned about that myself. And I guess last question of the day is, are you contemplating getting a pair of gold sneakers for $399?
They're made in China, did you notice? Two things about this.
Of course I did.
Number one, they're made in China. And number two, he's not shipping them until July. So he's doing the scam that these people do on eBay, where they put up a product that they don't own yet and, wait until somebody pays them an absurd price for it, and then they'll go out and buy it. And, it's just, go ahead.
I loved watching him getting booed like crazy at that at that sneaker expo. It was hysterical.
Yeah, Sneaker Con. I mean, which is perfect, right? Here's Don the Con.
Sneaker Con.
At Sneaker Con.
There you
go. With his latest con, and aren't those just the tackiest sneakers you've ever seen?
Oh my God! I'm just wondering what that Trump fragrance is, because we have a whole hashtag going on with Trump smells.
I understand.
And all this other stuff.
It's made out of urine, apparently. I don't know. The guy wears a diaper. He's and a number of people have said that he really smells bad most of the time. So
yeah, I recall. I remember one of the former congressmen stating that as well.
Yeah,
I think he was trapped in an elevator with him, and he said that, oh my God,
yep,
the smell of this guy.
Yep.
So that was a whole big thing going around. But anyway, hey, listen, thank you for taking my call. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Good talking to you, Tony. Thanks for the call. It's 20 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, exposing the con in conservative. Stay with us. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Alrighty, let's pick up your calls and see what's on your mind today. Gordon in Los Angeles. Hey, Gordon, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how you doing, man? Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
And first of all, I want to say you're a celebrity to me.
Okay, well, thank you, Gordon.
Anyway, this is President's Day. And I thought this was, I thought that to bring this up. This is a book that just came out. In fact, the author is, he's a host on a station on Sirius XM. And anyway, the guy basically attacks Abraham Lincoln as a white supremacist.
Well, I think I think earlier in his career he was actually. He gave a speech when he was running for president, or maybe it was when he was running for the Senate or for the House, where he talked about the inherent superiority of the white race. He changed his tune once the Civil War started. He changed his tune in a big way.
Correct. In other words, and then too, you got to think back at that time. I mean, even the most ardent abolitionists really didn't want blacks living in their neighborhoods and their daughters.
Yeah.
But and there was this question about what would we do to the liberated former slaves.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a whole bunch of talk, but he basically said anybody that supports Trump's, support Lincoln, it's the same type people that support Donald Trump.
Yeah.
This is in the first chapter of the book, man, and I tried to get through.
Who's the author?
It, but I couldn't. I just couldn't finish it.
Who's the author?
And
who wrote this, Gordon?
I just want to say,
Who wrote this book?
Clay Kane. The name of the book is The Grift.
Huh. And who's the author? I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
Clay Kane. I believe it's Clay Kane.
Oh, okay. I'm not familiar with that person. So.
Yeah, he's on Urban View.
Yeah. Okay.
Anyway,
good on him.
The thing is that I just want to say, I've been studying the Civil War since I was 8 years old. I had out of body experience that I was in one of the battles,
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is that I also have had the opportunity where my great grandmother. Her dad was a slave, and her grandfather was a slave. And I remember, all the time that her and her family, her brothers and sisters get together and we'd have discussions, Anytime you went to any black person's house at that time before 1963, it was a picture of Jesus and Abraham Lincoln,
mm-hmm.
Jesus Kennedy, But the thing is that, they adored Lincoln. And it wasn't because of what Lincoln thought, or what Lincoln attitude toward segregation or whatever. It was because of what Lincoln did.
Yeah. Yeah. Same with Lyndon Johnson. Lyndon Johnson said some pretty racist things, in his career, and yet what he did was pretty important.
Right, Truman was known to use the N-word, you know.
Yeah, sure.
But the thing is that, you know, I don't know if any other person. I mean, first of all, Lincoln gave his life. He lost his life. You know, you read some of the things that John Wilkes Booth said. You know, part of it was because he bought a slave. You know, and then on top of that, he saved the Union. Yep. Imagine if the South were the one separated. We'd have had about 5 different countries in America. The continent would have looked like Europe.
Yep. No, great thoughts on a President's Day here, Gordon.
Right. So I just want to say that basically, you know, I'm judging not by what he maybe thought, but it's by what he did. And I think there was no other man at that time that would have freed the slave except Abraham Lincoln. So.
Yep. There you go. Gordon, thank you. Thank you very much. Gus in Woodstock, New York. Hey, Gus, what's up?
Hi, Tom. You know, it's great talking to you because I can totally relate to your end of the show. I've been part of a progressive talk show for like 67 years now.
Cool.
Up here in 27 years, actually, not 67.
Yeah, that's even
though I'm 81, no, 67, something else.
Yeah.
But you could tell I was born in Brooklyn like at 81. So it's a PSA for me. You know, just being, I'm totally lucid. So if you're truly conscious, doesn't matter what age you are.
Yeah.
And I just have a PSA to share with you, and that's to watch this movie on Netflix. It's called Einstein and the Bomb.
Okay.
And it's the whole deal of what's actually going on now, like how Hitler and his rhetoric is exactly what Trump is doing. You know, it's the same rhetoric.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so I would recommend your listeners really to check that out.
Einstein and the Bomb on Netflix.
Yes, absolutely. You know, that's a must.
Yeah.
And in terms of it's a great time for you really to think outside the box. And so I went on to I listened to every second of the Supreme Court, right? So I started to listen because I'm a musician for all these years. I've played all over the world for the past 67 years of inflections and innuendos. So when you're listening to Trump lawyer, they just let him rip. You understand?
Yeah.
So when they were questioning the lawyers of the state, they got aggressive and they became prosecutors.
Oh, I know. It was they knew in advance the conclusion that they wanted to arrive at, and they will. They're gonna keep him on the ballot. Gus, thank you for the call. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's Talk Media for the sane among us. We'll be right back with your calls. Hi, for our book club today, we're reading from Bernie Sanders' new book, Where We Go From Here, 2 Years in the Resistance. This is from the introduction. During my campaign for president in 2016, I stated over and over again that the future of our country was dependent upon our willingness to make a political revolution. I stressed that real change never occurs from the top down. It always happens from the bottom up. No real change in American history, not the labor movement, the civil rights movement, the women's movement, the gay rights movement, the environmental movement, or any other movement for social justice has ever succeeded without grassroots activism, without millions of people engaged in the struggle for justice. That's what I said when I ran for president. That's what I believe now. That's what I've been working to accomplish over the last several years. At a time of massive and growing income and wealth inequality, as our nation moves closer and closer to an oligarchic form of society, we need an unprecedented grassroots political movement to stand up to the greed of the billionaire class and the politicians they own. And the good news is we're making progress. People in every region of our country are standing up and fighting back against the most dishonest and reactionary president in the history of the republic. In state after state, they're also taking on establishment politicians who are more concerned about protecting their wealthy campaign contributors than they are with the needs of the middle class and the working people they're supposed to represent. We're making progress when millions of people in every state in the country take to the streets for the Women's March in opposition to Trump's reactionary agenda. We're making progress when an unprecedented grassroots movement elects a young African American as mayor of Birmingham, Alabama.
We're making progress when tens of thousands of Americans turn out at rallies and town hall meetings to successfully oppose the Republican effort to throw 32 million people off health insurance. We're making progress when governors and local officials announce in response to student demands tuition-free public colleges and universities. We're making progress when over the past 2 years, hundreds of first-time candidates of every conceivable background run for school board, city council, state legislature, and Congress, and many of them win. The good news is that the American people are far more united than the media would like us to believe. They get it. They know that over the past 40 years, despite a huge increase in worker productivity, the middle class has continued to shrink while the very rich have become very much richer. They know that for the first time in the modern history of the United States, our kids will likely have a lower living standard than us. The bad news is that instead of going forward together, demagogues like Trump win elections by dividing us. The bad news is that too many of us are getting angry at the wrong people. I was not an immigrant picking strawberries it was not an immigrant picking strawberries at $8 an hour who destroyed the economy in 2008. It was the greed and illegal behavior of Wall Street. It was not transgender people who threw millions of workers out on the street as factories were shut down all across the country. It was profitable multinational corporations in search of cheap labor abroad. Our job, for the sake of our kids and grandchildren, is to bring our people together around a progressive agenda. Are the majority of people in our country deeply concerned about the grotesque level of income and wealth inequality that we are experiencing? You bet they are. Do they believe that our campaign finance system is corrupt and enables the rich to buy elections? Overwhelmingly they do. Do they want to raise the minimum wage to a living wage and provide pay equity for women? Yes, they do. Do they think that the very rich and large corporations should pay more in taxes so that all of our kids can have free tuition at public universities and colleges? Yep. Do they believe that the United States should join every other major country and guarantee health care as a right? Yes, again. Do they believe climate change is real? You got to be kidding. Are they tired of the United States of America, the wealthiest country in the history of the world, falling apart at the seams with roads, bridges, water systems, wastewater plants, airports, rails, levees, and dams either failing or at risk of failing? Who isn't? Further, a majority of the American people want comprehensive immigration reform and a criminal justice system that is based on justice, not racism or mass incarceration. Today, what the American people want is not what they're getting. In fact, under Republican leadership in the House, Senate, and White House, they are getting exactly the opposite of what they want. The American people want a government that represents all of us. Instead, they're getting a government that represents the interests and extremist ideology of wealthy campaign contributors. They want environmental policies that combat climate change and pollution and that will allow our kids to live on a healthy and habitable planet. Instead, they're getting executive orders and legislation that push more fossil fuel production, more greenhouse gas emissions, and more pollution. They want a foreign policy that prioritizes peacemaking. Instead, they're getting increased military spending and growing hostility to our long-term democratic allies. They want a nation in which all people are treated with dignity and respect and where we continue our decades-long struggle to end discrimination based on race, religion, gender, sexual orientation, and nation of origin. Instead, they have a president who seeks to win political support by appealing to those very deep-seated prejudices. During the last several years, I've worked hard in Washington, but I've also traveled to 32 states in every region of our country. I've seen the beauty, strength, and courage of our people. I've also seen fear and despair. I've talked to people with life-threatening illnesses in West Virginia who worry about what will happen to them or their loved ones if they lose the health insurance that keeps them alive. I've talked to young immigrants, dreamers in Arizona who are frightened to death about losing their legal status and being deported from the only country they have ever known. I talked to a young single mom in Nevada worried about how she can raise her daughter on $10.45 an hour. I talked to retirees and older workers in Kansas who are outraged that as a result of congressional legislation, they could lose up to 60% of the pensions they paid into and were promised as deferred compensation for a lifetime of hard work. Bernie Sanders, where we go from here.
From international trade policy to immigration policy to housing, we've got all kinds of topics. The wars between Republicans and Democrats, the Republican efforts to induce fascism in the United States. A great selection of opinions will be found over at HartmannReport.com. From Los Angeles to Columbia, South Carolina, from Birmingham, Alabama to Baltimore, universal basic income programs are chalking up proof after proof of their viability. Basically just giving people, low-income people, poor people, somewhere between $500 and $1,500 a month, no strings attached, is lifting people out of poverty, getting them back on track, getting them into solid middle-class jobs, helping their children tremendously. This works. Now, we don't have to do UBI in the United States. We're the only developed country in the world that doesn't have a national health care program. Health expenses are whacking a lot of low-income people. We're the only developed country in the world that doesn't have free college education. Education expenses are whacking people. There's a lot we could do. We can subsidize housing. We can subsidize food. We do that with food stamps. We could expand it. There's a lot we could do to benefit from this. There's a whole report about that over at hartmanreport.com. Check it out. 35 minutes past the hour, picking up your calls here. John in Seattle. Hey, John, what's up?
Yeah, hi. Thanks for taking my call. I've got a positive note on Hunter Biden here. Reading the Seattle Times paper this morning, there's a full-page article about this friend of his that he met in 2019 named Kevin Morris, who's a Hollywood attorney. And he's given up some of his practice to be Hunter Biden's attorney. But they met in 2019 at a fundraiser for Joe Biden. And this friend of Morris, Kevin Morris, introduced, who was a film producer, introduced Biden to him. And they both had parallels going through the life. Like Morris saw parallels between their lives. And they were art lovers, recovering addicts, and both attorneys.
Interesting.
So they both, so Morris took a liking to him and has been paying his bills and taking care of all of his, everything. It was about $6.5 million worth of money that he's spent on Hunter Biden so far, helping him out.
What's your source for this, John? I've not heard anything like this.
Well, he's buying Hunter's artwork. He's an artist.
Okay.
And he's got a gallery in New York City, Georges Burgess Gallery in New York City.
Oh, so he's buying it to resell it. So what's your point, John? Why are you sharing this with me?
Well, it's like he's got someone that's on his side that's backing him up, that thinks that that's helping him out.
Right.
And I didn't know Hunter Biden was an artist.
Oh yeah, he is.
So that's just kind of a new one for me. But the amount of crap that they're putting this guy Morris through, they went through the committee on January 10th, and that was an amazing. But he's doing a documentary about all this.
Oh, interesting.
So while they push their way in, they're filming all of this, and everywhere they go, they're doing a documentary as well. He's going to do a documentary on Adam Kinzinger, the Republican.
Right. Very interesting.
So this guy, Kevin Morris.
Yeah, I'll have to check it out. John, thank you for the heads up on that. Appreciate it. Fred in Altamont Springs, Florida, excuse me. Hey, Fred, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, great speaking to you again. Hey, I want to bring up first, before I get into my little thing on the border, you're spot on about lobbyists and term limits. Florida, the state of Florida, has term limits on the Florida state representatives for the House and Senate, and also the governor, and the lobbyists rule here.
Yep.
I'm telling you.
Yep. That's what happens.
That's spot on. Yeah, well, anyway, on the border, me and a friend were talking about the other day, and we're talking about the dark days when Trump was in charge, when Sessions was in charge of the Attorney General. He said that they took away all the magistrates that were, they were doing the court cases for the immigrants. I don't know if you heard anything about that, but that's the main problem. There's so many people backlogged, they don't have enough judges to do the cases.
No, I know that. We've got a 7-year backlog right now, and this piece of legislation that came out of the Senate aims to reduce that to a 90-day backlog by hiring, something like 1,000 judges or magistrates or whatever they're called. And but sadly, it's tied up in the House of Representatives with Moscow Mike.
Yes. So that's the thing, you know. I would think, I don't know if it's easier to get magistrates through than it is judges. I'm not sure, but that's what he was saying. That's why, you know, he purposely did that to slow the whole
they don't
process
have
down.
to go through a Senate approval process, but they do have to have they do have to get a paycheck, and that's the problem. There's not the budget for them. In fact, ICE is about to hit a $700 million shortfall. Again, that legislation was going to clean that up as well, but it looks like pretty soon they're going to have to start laying off ICE workers, and
that's terrible.
you know, it's going to make the border situation even worse, which of course is exactly what the Republicans want. They have no desire in fixing the problem. They've been fighting any effort to fix it all the way back to when Paul Ryan refused to take it up when the legislation passed the Senate with almost 70 votes, as I recall. Fred, thank you for the call. Sharon in Seattle. Hey, Sharon, what's on your mind today?
Well, excuse me. Friday, you played a piece of something that Joe Biden was saying in a speech, or maybe it was a press conference. I don't know. I'm sorry to admit that I had fallen asleep. And I woke up right in the middle of that. Mm-hmm. And I've been trying to put it together and trying to find it because it was kind of shocking to me. And I wanted to hear really what he said. And I called just to see if someone in your office could find it for me. And he said he'd rather. I don't know,
Sharon, and I can't look it up while we're on the air. But I'm going to put you on hold here. Mark can look up Monday's or Friday's one sheet and see what we played and fill you in. Sharon's on line 2, Mark. Mary in St. Paul, Minnesota. Hey, Mary, what's on your mind today?
Yes, hi. I wandered over to a friend's house. It's a Republican, and of course, right out of the blue, she brings up these schools teaching children about LGBTQ issues. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking, is that really going on a lot? Or do you know? I mean, I almost hate to Google it because sometimes you get the right-wing answers to that stuff.
Yeah, the message that is being propagated or promulgated by Republicans is that this is an attempt to basically recruit our children into becoming gay, which is nonsense. Mm-hmm. What's going on is that there are some books in the libraries that have gay characters in them, and in the classes on human sexuality and whatnot, they mention that there are gay people as well as straight people, and this has the Republicans, or at least the bigots, in the GOP, all hysterical. But there's no evangelism. There's no, hey, you got to turn gay, or you got to become trans, or these arguments that are being made are just absurd, frankly, Mary.
Yeah, well, I can tell, but I didn't know how to respond to it at all. I was just because I don't pay attention to it. It's just.
Yeah.
Like, whatever.
My response is, I trust the teachers that we hire.
Yeah, that's a good answer.
And if I was really worried about it, I'd join the school board.
Right, that's a good answer right there.
Yeah, because we're not without power here. Sorry.
Right. Okay. All right. Great. Thank you,
Mary. James in Portland. Hey, James, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. So I was in the Navy. I was in Vietnam, and so the big thing on our ship was swimmers, and I would have to go around and throw grenades in at night just over the side, just in case there was a swimmer that came up with some explosives, because a couple ships went down. Okay, so then I'm thinking these carriers have 4 nuclear plants on them. And it would be very easy, and we had UDT on our ship, and I talked very easy to sink a carrier with a swimmer. And I'm thinking, if, there was a lot of wars that went down from ships that blew up.
Sure.
We're talking about the Maine, we're talking about Tonkin Gulf.
Yeah, the Spanish-American War, the Vietnam War. Those were both BS, by the way. The USS Maine apparently blew a boiler. But Teddy Roosevelt said it was under Frank, what's his name? Roosevelt's, the guy who was president when Roosevelt was vice president, McKinley, said that it was, it was sabotage, that it was an attack in Cuba. in the Havana Harbor, remember the Maine. That was the slogan for the Spanish-American War. And, of course, the Vietnam War, the Gulf of Tonkin, that apparently never happened either. And it looks like increasingly like Don Rumsfeld was the guy who literally made that up out of whole cloth because he wanted to have a war.
Okay, so in 1967, the Forester and Gulf and Talk, they had an electric spark that set off a rocket on one of the planes, and it hit John McCain's plane. He jumped out just in time. So it had this like domino effect, and one plane blew up another plane. Pretty soon the jet fuels went on fire and started melting through the decks. And this was a nuclear carrier, and it went down 3 decks, one more deck, and those nuclear reactors would have went off.
Whoa.
And there was 3 of these carriers that had incidents of fires, and all the Navy guys had to go to fire school to put out fires. I spent like 3 weeks at putting out fires in San Diego because this was such a threat. I mean, a carrier is a sitting time bomb.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess so. Well, I don't know what the alternative is, James.
Yeah. Well, I think they're obsolete, to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
I mean, we got drones now. But anyway, I just like to express I've always had this in the back of my mind, and I just like to... You gave me the chance to express my worry.
Well, thank you, James. Thanks for expressing it. We'll be right back, 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Picking up your calls. I'll be right back. Stay with us. Back, Alan in San Diego. Hey, Alan, what's on your mind today?
Hi, how you doing?
Good.
Hi. Yeah, there was a caller that told you about some people that died that worked for Deutsche Bank.
Yeah.
A woman.
A couple of people committed suicide.
Yeah, something that's funny because there was another person, and they found dead at I think El Cerritos or Cerritos High School in L.A. He worked for Deutsche Bank as well.
Huh. Interesting. And then you had Justice Kennedy, who resigned because his son had authorized $1 billion in loans to Donald Trump, and it appears that Trump was blackmailing him into resigning from the Supreme Court around that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Justin Kennedy was Justice Kennedy's son, and he was the head of the high net worth individual lending branch at Deutsche Bank, and he signed off on Trump's loans.
Wow, that's crazy. But also, too, I wanted to say this, too, that somebody brought up about 3 months ago. You were saying that about Trump and his bankruptcy. But anyway, I want to say this. There was a department store in the Northeast that was there for since the 1930s. And Trump bought the store, and about a year later, the place went bankrupt. The place was called Alexander's.
Huh. I didn't know anything about that.
Yeah. Because my mother used to take me shopping there all the time.
Yeah, I don't think he can run a business successfully unless he employs fraud.
Yeah, could you imagine you working at Alexander's, and all of a sudden, you go to work, and all of a sudden the doors are locked.
Yeah.
He said, everybody said, what's going on? Everything. Come to find out that Trump made a loan from Citibank, and next thing you know, the Citibank said we want our money and everything. He didn't have it, so they turned around and they had to close the stores, all of them.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know about that. Huh. Well, thank you, Alan. Thanks for sharing that with me. That's a fascinating story. I appreciate it. Jackie in Port Townsend, Washington. Hey, Jackie, what's up?
Hi. I subscribe to the Des Moines Register in Iowa, and they are listing the bills that are still alive. And it's House File 2518 would allow civil wrong death action for wrongful death of an embryo or fetus at any point in pregnancy.
Is this federal or Iowa?
Iowa.
Okay,
and
so
so
it's a state.
An unborn person having an abortion would be a Class A felony.
Right.
And it also assigns personhood to embryos and fetuses from the moment of fertilization.
Yeah.
So I would advise Iowans to call their representatives to kill that bill.
Yeah, this fetal personhood thing has been the ultimate dream. You know, the this is what we want of the anti-abortion movement forever. You know, if you could just define a fetus as a person, as a fully, you know, with all the legal rights of personhood, then everything would be just wonderful. And it's just, you know, they're getting there. They're getting there. This is what the Alabama Supreme Court just ruled yesterday.
Terrible.
Or last week, I guess. I guess it must have been last Friday. But, yep, Jackie, thank you. Thank you for pointing that out. It's 10 minutes before the hour. I'll be back with more of your calls in 60 seconds, so stay with us. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. So MAGA Mike and the Republicans want a religious test for people running for public office. They want to know that you are sufficiently Christian to be worthy of being elected. Right. MAGA Mike is one of these 7 mountain evangelicals. There are 7 domains where these dominionists believe that we need to have religion completely take them over. Education, religion, family, business, government and military, arts and entertainment, and the media. Seriously. This is not what Jesus was preaching when he said, give unto Caesar what is Caesar and unto God what is God's. This is the opposite, in fact, of what Jesus was teaching. It's the opposite of Matthew 25, where Jesus said the only way to get to heaven is by feeding the hungry, healing the sick, helping the poor. This is counter-Christian, anti-Christian, in fact. In fact, I think you could say it is the Antichrist's work. There's a piece about it over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. Nine minutes before the hour. Welcome back. Picking up your calls here. Gary in Monroe, Georgia. Hey, Gary, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom.
Hey, Gary.
Mr. Hartmann.
Gary, you are fading in and out. I'm going to put you on hold and let Mark figure out what's going on. He's on line 8, Mark, if you want to check that out. Sandra in Omaha, Nebraska. Hey, Sandra, what's up?
Well, everybody's all concerned about Putin and his threats for nuclear attack and whatnot. But do they ever listen to what's been happening in the past couple of years in Ukraine, where the equipment and the men that he's been shoving into this little war has been equipment from World War II and that era. And if they don't have enough of it, they cover it with egg crates painted gray to make it look like everything's armored, and the guys are armored, but they're not.
I know.
And the food they're getting is 30 years old or 50 years old. And the people they're getting, if they can't conscript them, they go to the prisons and they shut the power off.
That's right.
So that when you live in Siberia, you can make your choice. You can join the military, and you might get some food and some clothing and a little help, or you can stay there and freeze to death. So
right. Plus, if you join the military, you get your sentence commuted.
Yeah. So I'm not too concerned about Putin because he's lied all the time. And the other issue is that he and his other rich pals, they've drained their country of any penny they could get into their own pockets.
Yep.
And whatever should have gone, like we've done, we've spent a hell of a lot of money on military, haven't we? And even our military silos have the 5-inch floppy disks on controls of that, which are not connected to the internet. There's no way to hack those. Even that's old, but we still have people that know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And, I really don't worry too much about Putin's threats. He's a bully. He's always been a bully. He's grown up learning how to use that as a KGB officer, and he's bullied Trump perfectly.
Yeah,
So,
I agree.
I wouldn't believe one word out of his mouth.
Yeah, I'm not worried either. But it's the concerned trolls are going concerned nuts. Sandra, thank you. Well said. Thank you very much. Rose in Franklin, West Virginia. Hey, Rose, what's on your mind today?
Hi. I ran across an article, and it was that Truth Social and a blank check acquisition company were merging.
Yep.
And that Truth Social was going to go public. I was wondering if you could explain that a bit. I got went a bit over my head.
It's one of these SPAC companies, these special purpose acquisition companies, if that's what it stands for. It's basically kind of a shell company that had at some point enough revenue to be listed on the New York Stock Exchange, and they're merging that with the company that owns Truth Social so that they can get that listing, which gives them access to investment money. Whether that merger is going to happen or not, nobody knows. Whether it will hold up its value, nobody knows. The current valuation, I heard this on NPR this morning, of Truth Social is around $2 billion, which is pretty breathtaking, actually, for a failing social media company. But that's about all I know, Rose. I'm sorry, I don't have much beyond that. Richard in Columbus, Georgia. Hey, Richard, what's on your mind today?
Hey, I was just calling to say that we're a little off on that discussion of the Forrestal fire. First, the Forrestal's not nuclear. There was only one nuclear carrier at the time, the Enterprise.
Okay.
And it wasn't McCain's plane that was hit. He was sitting next to the plane that was hit.
I recall that now.
And
yeah, you're right.
And it hit it right in the drop tank and wound up blowing up the two bombs that the plane was carrying on the deck. And they're what punched the holes in the deck,
right?
Not the fuel.
Right.
But the fuel dumped in right after the bombs.
Right.
So it got the fire underneath and everything. But it wasn't a nuclear carrier.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Richard, for that. It's I normally don't just take whatever people say for granted, but one of the cool things about hosting this show is that when somebody calls in with bad information, somebody inevitably calls in to straighten to clean it up. I appreciate that. Richard, thank you very much.
He was trying, but I think he misremembered the thing.
I get it. Yeah, I'm not criticizing him. It's just thank you for setting the record straight. And my apologies to everybody else on hold. We're flat out of time. But we will be back tomorrow, same time, same place. And thank you for being with us today. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us, and that includes you. So get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon. Be good to yourself and the people around you. We'll catch up with you on the other side.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.